In this video, I'm going to show you how to go from zero knowledge of Claude Code to being able to create genuine profit-making solutions for customers without writing a single line of code yourself. I'm going to assume zero knowledge of coding, using AI, or having experience in building apps. This tutorial is designed to watch in order, but I've included chapters, so if you're just looking for something specific, then jump ahead and dip in as you need. I'm Jamie, and I run a channel on YouTube as well as TikTok on how to use AI to make money. I also run the free AI Freedom Finders community on School, where you can get all the files for this video and others for free. The link is in the description below. Before we jump into the full tutorial, I want to first talk about what Claude Code is and, really importantly, why we should even consider using it. To answer that first question, the why, let's look over here. Coding has gone from the preserve of only the developer to anyone with a good idea and a command of the English language and communication skills. And I've added communication skills in there in the end as well, because I think that is really important, and I'm going to tease that out a little bit more as we go through this tutorial. Claude Code and its competitors has really leveled the playing field in terms of the app ideation and problem solving field. And what do I mean by that? First and foremost, I think it's really important to understand that Claude Code is a way for us as entrepreneurs to solve problems. If we don't have a specific problem to solve, then we cannot make money. Entrepreneurs find problems that haven't been solved, solve them, and generate money by providing more value than they take. Claude Code is allowing us to do that in a way which we have not been able to do before. So what is Claude Code? Now, the answer I'm about to give here is not about the technical underlying specifications of the code and of the app itself and how it's come to being. If you want all that information, you can absolutely get it out there. But this tutorial is more practical. In essence, Claude Code is a way to communicate with your computer and turn thoughts into reality. To build apps, websites, to do things on your computer. And again, I've kept it really, really vague and loose here. Things. What does things mean? What things can you do on the computer? We'll go into that further in this demonstration, but I won't be covering absolutely every possibility because, to be quite honest, there's infinite ways in which you can use Claude Code, and your human imagination has really only the bounds of what you can use Claude Code for. Now, I do think it's worth mentioning here that there are alternatives to Claude Code, and they're very good alternatives as well. ChatGPT has released something called Codex, which does a very similar job. I actually prefer Codex for the planning phase and for the overarching strategic vision of what I'm trying to achieve. Now, I'm not going to go into Codex anymore in this tutorial because this is all about Claude Code, but I do want to give it a nod to say it is absolutely fantastic. And once you have got Claude Code under your belt, it's definitely worth looking at Codex in addition to Claude Code. Separately is Gemini 3. Google have just released Gemini 3 as the time of making this video, along with their integrated development environment. So their app, which kind of hosts everything together for coding, they've released a way which you can use Gemini 3 in an agentic method to do exactly the same thing as Claude Code. Very, very interactive. And it's very, very good. However, I do think it's a bit more advanced, and I don't think you have quite as much control, which when you're starting out, I think is better to actually understand, to be able to control and to see what's happening before you just completely let it loose. But Gemini 3 is fantastic, and I have been using it an awful lot in addition to Claude Code. That's the notable competition. Now let's go on to the initial setup. So for the initial setup, there are a few things that you're going to need in order to get Claude Code to work, even on a really basic level. There are a few things that I would also recommend in addition to the absolute minimum requirements. We'll start with the minimum requirements now, and first and foremost is a subscription. This is a paid for product. To my knowledge, there are no free options here for Claude Code. And there are 3 different ways in which you can subscribe to Claude. You can use their Pro plan, you can use their Max plan, and you can use their API. And this is in order of cheapest from Pro through to the API. And let me explain what I mean by that. So here we are. This is what it looks like when you get to Claude's homepage, and we can see here we got at the top, we can choose to try Claude. Now, if you don't have a Claude account already, you're going to need to set one up, but let's have a look at the pricing first of all. You can get started by trying Claude out a little bit like ChatGPT with just the chat. And you can see here we've got chat on web, iOS, Android, and on the desktop. So that's fine. You can do an awful lot of stuff, but what you can't do is Claude Code, because the second one here in the Pro plan is access Claude Code on the web and in your terminal. And it's in the terminal that we want. That is Claude Code. And you can see here that this is on the Pro plan. Now, the Pro plan is not too expensive. It's $17 per month. It is actually $20 if billed monthly. It's basically $20 a month. I still think you can sum that up just for a 1-month test. And if you get a lot of value out of it, you can either pay the $200 for the full annual subscription, which averages at $17 a month, or you can just keep paying $20 a month until you get to the point where you decide either it's good for you or it's not. The way in which Claude works and all AI models is that they have a number of tokens. So when you ask it a question or when you ask it to do something, it will then use up a certain amount of energy and memory in order to answer the questions. And they are called tokens. And the way in which most models work, including Claude Code, is that it will allow you to have a certain number of tokens on each price plan. So you can see here that in the Pro, they've said you get more usage from the Pro than you do the free. And again, here we can see that everything in Pro on the Max, you get everything, and then you get 5 to 20 times more usage than Pro, depending on which plan you do. And you can see here that this is from $100 a month. So if we went up here, there are actually two different Pro plans. One is at $100 a month, and the next one at the time of recording was $200 a month, and that gives you 20 times more than the Pro. But again, whilst we're starting out here, assuming zero knowledge, assuming zero experience, go for the Pro plan, and only if you hit the maximum limits, then consider upgrading to Max. And I would start by upgrading to the cheaper Max. Don't jump to the most expensive, save your money as long as you possibly can. So I mentioned a third option, which was API. And if we go up here to pricing, we can see here there is an API option. So let's have a look at that. Now this is slightly confusing because what you see here is, first of all, you can use different models. So you've got Opus 4.5. This is the most intelligent model and good for coding. You've got Sonnet 4.5, which is much quicker and generally speaking, still very good. And then Haiku 4.5, which is very, very fast, very, very cost efficient, but not quite as intelligent. And the way that all of these models are charged, you can see there are different charges for the input, and generally output is more expensive, and indeed it is. Here it's 5 times more expensive. Most of the time it's usually like twice as expensive, but again here it's 5 times. So it's quite interesting. The models are changing at the moment, and these do change from time to time. So you really need to keep an eye on how much things are costing. I wouldn't recommend, if you're just starting out, using the API, because it's essentially pay-as-you-go plan, but it does work out more expensive. It basically gives Claude a kind of unlimited ability to just rip through. You can set pricing limits, but if you're just starting out, definitely recommend starting with the Pro plan. Just wanted to point this out. If you do get to the point where you are making a lot of money, and actually the API might make sense for you at that point. So now we understand the subscription model. The next thing I want to talk about is what we're going to do with Claude Code, where we're going to put it. And the two broad options are we can install it into a terminal, which you've probably kind of seen. It's like a matrixy type thing with the code that you can type into that you see all like kind of traditional coders using, or you can use it in Cursor, VS Code, or another IDE. So IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, and that really is a fancy way of saying a kind of coding or an app development. And the ones I've just put here, we've got Google's Anti-Gravity, Cursor, which is the one we're going to use for this demonstration, VS Code, which is Microsoft's, and then we've got Windsurf, which is another competitor. Now it's worth mentioning here that these three really are built off the back of Microsoft's VS Code. So this kind of was the original, and then these three have been built off the back of those. So the next thing we're going to do is actually install Claude Code onto our computer. Now, this looks like a little bit techie for those of you that have got no coding experience at all. However, trust me, it really isn't any more difficult than copy and pasting an email from one colleague and starting a new thread or something like that. So if you're on Mac or Linux, it's the green. If you're on Windows PowerShell, it's the blue. And I think there's slightly something different again if you're on a different part of Windows. You can go to the Claude website, Claude.ai, and you can see what the correct terminology is for Windows. So there are two options here for Mac and Linux. One is to use Homebrew. If you are familiar with Homebrew, go ahead and use this. If you're not familiar with Homebrew, then don't worry about this one. Just go straight for this one here. So this is the official Claude recommended way anyway. So all we need to do is double click here, copy it, and then we'll go to a terminal. So if you've never opened terminal before on a Mac, you can go Command and space, and you can then search for terminal and you'll find it like that. Or if you've got another app like iTerm, then you can use that instead. However, terminal is absolutely fine. You'll open it up. It might be a white background instead of a black. It doesn't really matter. All we want to do is get to the point where you've got this tab here, this cursor, and you want to paste, and you can see the text is above there. And then we want to hit return. And you can see now it's setting up Claude Code, installing Claude Code native build latest. And it's going to run through that process, and all it's going to do is download the app and make it ready for us to use. And there we go. You can see now it says installation complete, and we can test this by typing the word Claude and hitting enter. And this now enters into a very basic setup process. So I'm just going to walk you through the setup process now. We'll do it together. Really, really simple. All we want to do is just make sure that this actually works. So you can choose here and you can see it's fairly interactive. It's like an old school computer game. For those of you that remember those, you can just scroll through by using your arrow keys on your keyboard. So you can just press down and you can see light mode, ANSI, dark mode, ANSI, light mode, colorblind friendly, dark mode, colorblind friendly, light mode or dark mode. I actually like the dark mode, so that's the preference I'm going to go with. And then you've got two options to log in. Okay, so you got the Claude account with subscription. There you go. You got the Pro, Max. And I didn't mention Team or Enterprise, but I'm going to assume for this demo that you aren't on Team or Enterprise, or the API. Again, my recommendation, go with the Pro or the Max. Ideally go with the Pro to start with, get going. If you need to, move up to the Max. So we're going to hit enter. That will take us into our browser. That will take us through to a screen like this once you have logged into Claude. So I just logged in a moment ago to Claude, so my account is already up and running. It's now asking me to authorize. If you aren't already logged in on your browser, it will just ask you to log in. And if you haven't yet made an account, you will have to make an account now, and then you'll be able to log in, and then you'll see this screen. So we go ahead, click authorize, and you'll see now that's done. And if we go back to the terminal, you'll see this has now worked, logged in successfully, press enter and continue. And here's some security notes. Fine, it's pointing out, and you can go to this website to check what the prompt injection risks could be and make sure that you only use it with code you trust. Absolutely true. So press enter to continue. And now we have a choice. So it's saying, do you want to use Claude Code's terminal setup, or do you want to use your own versions? So I would say yes, go with use recommended settings. It then means that you can hold shift down and press enter for a new line. It means that rather than you having to just type all one big block of text and you kind of losing the thread of where you're in later on, you'll be able to see that you can hold shift, press enter, and it will do a new line or a carriage return in old school terms, but it won't send the prompt off. It won't send the instruction. At the moment, return is always set to send the prompt. You'll see that in a moment. So we'll hit enter here. Now it says, do you trust the files in this folder? So you'll see this every time you start Claude up and you start in a folder which it hasn't started in before. So for now, I'm just going to choose yes, because this is my home directory. So you can see here, it's in the users folder, and then it's in the YouTube demo. So up here, you can see, do you trust the files in this folder? And it's explaining. So if you aren't familiar with code and you aren't familiar with how things work in paths and coding, the very first / means kind of like the real center of your computer. And then the first part is users, and that's in the users folder or the users directory. And then the next / means the next folder inside that. So within the users folder, we are in another folder, and this one's called YouTube demo. And that is the classic way in which Apple sets up the user account. So I'm in the YouTube demo user account, which is correct, in the users folder. So it's asking, do I trust all of the code in here? I do, because it's my folder. So I'm going to choose yes, proceed. And this is now Claude Code. We are now in here. And to all intents and purposes, although it looks kind of a bit weird and a bit graphic-y and geeky and what have you, we are now just in a similar process to what you see when you fire up ChatGPT on the web. So let's just start a conversation. Hey, how's it going? Okay, obviously this is not the purpose of doing this. I just want to show you that we can type a message, we hit return, and it's then thinking, and it says, hey, I'm doing well. How can I help? Cool. Okay, so that all works. Now we've managed to install it. We've checked that it's working, and we'll go into everything else in the next section. So that completes a section on how to install Claude. And you can see here, we've got the terminal and we've installed it. We've used curl this time, but you could have used brew. And if you're on Windows, you could use IRM, and that's all fine. I just wanted to note that there are two other methods that I'm not going to cover in this tutorial because it is much of a muchness, and that is Slack. So for those of you that haven't heard of Slack, Slack is like a WhatsApp for business, and it allows you to have chats internally. And what you can now do is you can install Claude into Slack. So it's like a chat function in Slack. So you can DM Claude and you can do what we're going to do now, but you can do it from Slack instead. And then the other option is via web or iOS. So you can start up the Claude website or go onto Claude on your phone. And with a little bit of installation, you can then ask Claude to do specific tasks. The issue with this method is that it only allows you to do discrete tasks. So you can ask it, go and have a look at this code for me and then do some stuff, but you can't go backwards and forwards, and it's a little bit more clunky. I'm going to show you at the end of this video how, if you really want to develop on your iPhone, how to do it the best possible way, or the best way that I've found so far, which is kind of like connecting what we're going to do now into your iPhone. So that is the most powerful way. If you've already got Claude installed and you want to jump straight to that section, then go down into the description below and find the timestamp. It is there, and hopefully that will help you. But in the meantime, we have now installed Claude into the terminal, and it's actually across the whole computer. But I am going to stop very briefly now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about IDE, so integrated development environments, because I think certainly as someone who has no coding experience or little coding experience, using an IDE actually makes creating your apps a lot easier and a lot more intuitive. Although at first there's a little bit more work, again, I promise you it's 5 more minutes work now for a ton more value later. So we're very quickly going to go through that process. I'm going to use Cursor here, and we're just going to go to cursor.com. So this is what cursor.com looks like, and we can just choose here, download for Mac OS. If you're on Windows, you'll need to scroll down to the bottom, choose the download here at the resources, and then you could use Windows or Linux again. So I've just opened up Cursor now that I've installed it, and you can see here that it says the best way to code with AI, subjective, however, maybe it is. And you've got the choice sign up or log in. If you haven't already signed up, I've already signed up, so I'm just going to click log in. And you'll see now we've got some preferences. So key bindings, don't worry about this. This is if you've basically been using another app before. Chat language, obviously choose your own language, and then open cursor from terminal. Don't need to worry about that really, but you can choose install if you really want. And then we just press continue. Again, you get to choose how you want your appearance to look, customize it, etc. I would just go with all the defaults unless you have a particular preference. And then it will explain to you some of the benefits of how all of this works. I'm going to skip all of this for now, because I really want to get straight into Claude Code itself. So this is now Cursor, and it's kind of like there's not really anything happening here. What's going on? And the reason for that is that we haven't got a project set up yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click Command New, and this is like a new document. So hi, I'm Jamie. So there's a bit of code, right? Obviously it's a bad bit of code because that wouldn't actually work on a program, but that's fine. We've then got a couple of options up here, which I think I want to talk about. So I'm just going to make this window slightly larger so you can see it better. And what you've got up here are the different tabs. Well, first of all, I'll just show you very quickly. On the left-hand side, we can press this tab here, which says toggle primary sidebar. And now what you can see here is we haven't got a folder opened. We will open one later, but we won't do that yet. Or a repository. Don't worry about that if you don't know what that is. You've got the search function here, which is to search for specific text across all the files that you've got open. You've got Git, which again, we will worry about later when we talk about repositories. And then you've got extensions, which we won't worry about right now. The next bar we'll cover off is the right-hand side, which is the toggle the AI pane. Now, this is like Cursor's own chatbot, and it's like a little bit of a competitor to Claude Code itself. And actually, you can use Claude in here. If you choose on the auto and you turn that off, then actually you can see there are different models. So Opus and Sonnet are both Claude models. And then you've got OpenAI's ChatGPT, GPT, and then you've got Google Gemini, and then you've even got Grok down here. And to a certain degree, these are really good alternative ways of using AI if you don't want to use Claude Code. But from my experience, using Claude Code directly via the way that we're setting up now is absolutely the best way. I mean, it isn't really any more difficult. It just looks a little bit different, that's all. So if you stick with it, I genuinely think it's worth it. So again, we will toggle that one off. We don't need that, but I just wanted to show you. And the final one here is that we're going to look at the bottom bar. And you can see here there are a number of different options. We've got problems, output, debug console, terminal, and ports. And we are in terminal already, which is where we want to be, because that's where we run Claude from. So we'll make this a little bit larger. And we can type now Claude into here, hit return. Again, we get the same question. Again, in this instance, we're still in users YouTube demo, so that's fine. And we just hit enter a second time. And we're back into that familiar screen again. Now we can toggle off the sidebar because we don't need that on for now. And if you really wanted to, we could drag it all the way to the top, and it looks exactly the same as when we were just in terminal directly, but we don't need to keep it all the way up. We can keep it slightly further down. And then we've got the ability to see code above. And this is where it becomes very, very powerful, because when we're just using Claude Code in the terminal, Claude Code shows us the changes it's making to code, but it's quite unintuitive for those of us that aren't developers naturally. Whereas using an IDE like this, we then get the opportunity to see the code as it should look, and we can see the changes, and it's all really beautifully laid out. So really recommend taking the time to install an IDE. Doesn't have to be Cursor, but Cursor's really good. Interestingly now, it's telling us that Claude's got a context of open files and selected lines, and we can review Claude Code changes in the comfort of this IDE. And we can do Command Escape for a quick launch, or Command Option K to reference files or lines of your input. So let's continue by pressing enter. And now we're back in here. Now we're really ready to start setting up a project. And before we go into an actual project, I want to talk about the fact that Claude has got kind of settings and it does a lot of powerful stuff under the hood, which we can start to understand now because we're at the right point. So first and foremost is a file called CLAUDE.md. MD stands for Markdown. It's a kind of text file that AI really likes to read. It's very easy for it. It's just text, but it helps it to understand what we're trying to achieve. And there are two different Claude.md files, and I think it's really important to explain this up front because a lot of people get confused with this. There is the user Claude.md, and then there is the project by project Claude.md. So essentially the user one will remain the same for all of the things that you're doing. And this Claude.md tells Claude Code all about you, about how you like to work, about your general setup and all that kind of things. Whereas this one, you'll create a new one for every different project, every different app, every different problem you're solving will have a different Claude.md. A simple analogy might be that if you worked at McDonald's, you would have a kind of user file, which would be the equivalent of every time a customer comes in and you make a burger, then you will put the bread at the bottom, you will then fill it with the fillings, and then you put the bread on the top and you will wrap it up. And it doesn't really matter which burger you do that for, that kind of same process will always happen. You might have other important points, such as always greet the customer with a smile, always be polite and friendly. If you're not sure what to do, ask the manager. This kind of happens no matter which customer you interact with and which order you're making. That's the general settings. We've then got the project by project, which in McDonald's terms is like burger by burger. So you might have one customer that comes along and specifically asks for an order where they want a Big Mac, but they don't want any lettuce. In this instance, you would say, okay, so if you're making a Big Mac without lettuce, then the first thing you need to do is and explain it and go into the details of how you make a Big Mac without lettuce. The point being, project by project changes every time. The user's file will generally stay the same. Obviously, you can update it, but it stays the same between all the different projects that you. So over here, I've got two examples. It could be something like, I'm building a business, not learning to code. Explain things simply, assume I'm smart but non-technical. Keep solutions simple over clever. Add comments explaining what code does. If you're unsure about something, ask me. And my preferences, simple beats complex, working beats perfect, and explain before doing. Now you can go into an awful lot more detail, and as you progress and you understand more about what you're doing and your preferences, I absolutely encourage you to update these files. But for now, this is the level that you probably want to start at. And then depending on the project that you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, are you starting with a complete blank template, or have you actually taken someone else's project and you're building it out from there? Will depend on what your Claude.md is for the project. So here we've got a hash, and in AI speak, hash is like main heading, and then 2 hashes is like subheading, and then 3 would be like a subheading. So hash, project name, so replace that for whatever your project's called, and then what this is, and then you explain with 1 paragraph, what are we building and for whom, what the tech stack is. If you don't know yet, that's fine. We're not going to worry about that just yet. The current status, and then any important notes. And if you want to, when you get started, you can literally copy the exact text here into your Claude.md, and then you can work with Claude to build out your Claude.md, and I will show you that in a moment too. But I wanted to talk about the fact there's 2 different levels. There is a kind of holistic level, and then there is project by project level. In order to get started on doing that, we want to use a / command. Now, / command sounds a little bit weird, difficult, whatever. All it means is it's a sentence or a word after the /. So if we do / here, you'll see immediately that we have a number of different options, and you can use your arrows and you can go down to see all the different options that are available right now within Claude. And then we can also start to type it. So let's say, for example, we wanted to do help. We could type / help, hit return. And then you can see here, we've got the information about what Claude does. So shortcuts, ! for bash mode. We'll cover that later. / for a / command, @ for file paths, and hash to memorize. And we'll go over all of those as we go through. I just want to show you that we've now got help up. We can use the arrow or the tab rather, and we can tab across here. We can now see that there are commands, browse the default commands here, and then we can tab again to see custom commands. And at the moment, there are no custom commands found. We'll cover that later too. If we're finished, we can just press escape to exit. So we've got all the information here, and escape again. And if you're ever unsure and you can't even remember how to do the / help, it shows you right down here, ! for shortcuts. So if you just do !, immediately you get some information about the different options that you can run. But now we're going to start setting up a project as if it is entirely for the first time, that we are building a project. We are not taking anyone else's code. We're not building anything. We're starting something completely from scratch, our own idea. And in order to do that, we want to initialize the repository. Now, this is a little bit conceptual, but I just want to explain that there are some extra settings that we don't necessarily see in our normal file browser. And there is a directory which is called .claude. And .claude is a kind of hidden folder which contains things like settings, commands, agents, and hooks. And we're going to go over each of those different things in a moment, as it says here later. Now, assuming that we're starting from absolute scratch and you've got no experience of coding or development or anything else in the past, I now want to talk briefly about GitHub. You've probably heard of GitHub, but you may not know what it is. And GitHub is kind of like a OneDrive or Google Drive or Dropbox for coding. And it seems a little bit abstract and a little bit complicated when you're first getting started using GitHub. But you have got one massive advantage, which is Claude. So you don't really need to understand what GitHub is. You don't really need to understand how it works, certainly. You just need to be able to make sure that you can talk to Claude and figure it out. What is GitHub? It essentially allows you to make a backup of all your code so that if your computer dies, if you drop it in the lake, whatever, your code is saved somewhere else on the cloud, so you can get another computer and then you can just grab your code and continue working. It also allows you to version track. So if you've done some code and then you do some other code and something happens and breaks it, you can roll back to the version that was working before, or you can check and see what's changed. And that's really useful. You don't need to even do that yourself. Again, you can get Claude to do this, but it's very, very helpful. It helps Claude to stay on track with things. And then finally, out with this conversation today, you can collaborate with other people by using something called branches, and that will allow one person to work on one part of your app, another person to work on another. And what you can do, and this is one of the most advanced parts of Claude, is that you can actually have 2 or 3 or 4 different versions of Claude running. One's looking at one branch, one's looking at another branch, one's looking at another branch. So you could have one fixing the web page, one fixing the database, and one fixing the back end. And we'll go into all of that later, but I want to just give you a kind of top level, real basic understanding of how this works. And the reason I want to do this is because we want to gain some really good habits from the offset when we're setting up. The final thing I'll mention about best development practices is that there are generally 3 or more different, what we call environments. And that is as follows. We have local, we have staging, and we have production. Now, local is what we're going to work on first and foremost. It's on your computer. It's where you are right now. It's just saving to your desktop, maybe saving those files also in GitHub, but you're only running the code on your laptop. So your laptop is the computer. It's where everything's saved. It's where everything works. No one else can come along and test out your app unless they come to your computer and they have a go on your computer. That's local. The next step is staging. And staging traditionally is a kind of copy of a live app, but just for testing purposes. And you can avoid this step when you're starting out, but it's really good to get the understanding of how to do this. And you might actually start off by going from local straight to production, and then eventually your production environment becomes staging, and then you create another environment which becomes your new production. And the difference between staging and production is really that production you allow all your customers to see or your clients to see, and staging is just for you to practice on, but it is exactly the same as production. So if you've got it on the internet, then there are certain people that should be able to see it on the internet and test it and make sure that it all works. And again, GitHub allows you to have these kind of different areas and to be able to make changes, and then that code will then flow from your local computer onto the internet where you can test it, and then onto the internet where your customers can then use it. Okay, so if you're thinking right now, but Jamie, I don't know how to use Git, this stuff's getting really complicated, you promised me it's going to be really simple, then this next part is for you. Let's now go back into our IDE, so cursor in this case, and we'll click on the Claude Code tab. And what we're now going to do is we're just going to have a conversation with it and say what we want to achieve, but we don't really know how to do it. I've just said, I want to set up GitHub for the first time. I've never done it. And immediately Claude is now starting to figure out what is on the computer, what's there, whether or not we can do this. Now, I've probably already got Git installed on my computer, but if you haven't, again, Claude will help you, it will guide you through, and it will tell you what you need to do. That's the great thing about this. It's not just something that will give you information and advice and tell you, oh, go off and do this. It can do it with you collaboratively. I just want to talk you through what you can see in front of you. It looks a little bit weird. It's really, really simple to understand. So when you see the word bash, that means it's running a command inside your computer. So we've got here bash, and then we've got git -- version, and it says it's running it. So it has not actually started running it yet. And then again, we've got bash and another command here. And all these two are waiting because this one is running right now. And then down here, what we can now see is it's telling us this is a bash command, and this is the command that we want to do. And the reason why is because it wants to check if Git is installed. And now we've got options here. So do you want to proceed? So Claude starts off by being very cautious, and you'll see here, do you want to proceed? You've got yes, yes, and don't ask again, or tell Claude what to do differently. And again, you can use your arrow keys to go up and down. So you can go back to the top. So yes is yes this time. The next one down, number 2 would be yes, and don't ask again for git -- versions commands in this project. Or number 3 would be to tell Git to do something different. And you can say, no, don't do that. In this case, I'm very happy that it runs git -- versions because I want it to find out if we have Git installed. And what you can now see up here is that we've got Apple Git 155. So that's the output. So that's telling Claude that Apple Git is already installed. And then now it's moving on to the next thing that it needs to do, which is to run the next command. And again, we've got the same process. So it's saying it wants to run this process. Are you happy for Claude to do it? I'll hit return again because I am. This time we got an error exit code 1. That means something went wrong, but I'm not too worried. We'll find out what that is in a minute. And then it's jumped straight down to here to check, and it's been able to run this without permission, and therefore it said no matches found. And then we've got a response. So now Claude's talking to us and saying, great, Git is already installed on your system. Now let me create a plan to get you fully set up with GitHub. Perfect. Here's what we'll do to get you set up with GitHub. Step 1, GitHub account. First, do you already have a GitHub account? And if not, you need to go to sign up. So for this tutorial, if you don't have a GitHub account, just go to github.com/signup. Very, very simple. Create an account. And once you've created an account, then come back here and let Claude know your GitHub username and email you signed up with. If you already have an account, then just tell username and email, and we'll proceed with the configuration. So I'll go and do that now, and then I'll come back once I have done a little bit of backwards and forwards with Claude and got it all set up. So I've given it my email address and I've given it my username, and then you can now see in this line here that Claude has now configured my global username as my username that I gave it, and it's configured my global email address to the email I gave it to. And then it's now asking us to check the users, and now it's confirmed that it's provided the information that I've given it. So that's all good. It's working really, really well. It's now doing something a little bit more technical, which is basically creating a password between this computer and GitHub to allow the two to link together. We'll just hit enter there. And again, it's just checking that it's worked correctly. And now it's checking that we've got the public part of our password is available and it's linked to my account. All looks good so far. And it's giving us some instructions now. Okay, this is one of the very few parts that we have to do ourselves, because until we've got the password set up, we can't allow Claude to access GitHub. So what we'll do is we'll follow these instructions now and come back. So you can see here it says go and log in. So I've just logged in the background, and then it says now to click the green new SSH key button. So let's go to do that now. And you can see it's up here. So we'll click it. If we go back and check the instructions, give it a title. So I'm going to give it a title of YouTube demo account. Paste the above key into the key field. So let's just copy that now. I've pasted it there and click add SSH key. So now what we can see here is that it says you've successfully authenticated, but GitHub does not provide shell access, which is fine. Don't worry about that. It's given us some suggested common next steps. So now I'm saying is great. Now let's create a Git directory in my user directory. So what I'm thinking about here is that we're going to make multiple projects as we become more experienced. So to have one folder called Git, and then within that folder, we're going to have project 1, project 2, project 3, project 4. That will then allow us to keep our files organized and it not be really confusing about what's going on, and Claude and us and Git will all be able to find the right code in the right place. So I then said, let's create a YouTube demo directory for a new GitHub project. And you can see there now, again, if you've got no experience with coding or with using terminal or anything else, this might look a little bit foreign to you. Let me just talk you through it. It's not complicated. It's not scary. And you can always turn around to Claude and say, go down to number 3 and say, what are you doing? And it will then explain it to you. But in this case, I'll talk you through because I already know. And what it's running is bash mkdir is make directory. -p means a permanent one. And we're going to go to the user directory, which is where we are already, to make it a Git and then YouTube demo. That's exactly what I've asked for. So I'm very happy for it to run a go ahead and run that. So press yes. And then what it's done after making the directory is it's then done something called ls, which is list. And then it's listed them all. And you can see here we have got a new folder within Git called YouTube demo, which is perfect. And it's telling you that there. I've created both. The directories are ready to go. Would you like me to initialize the YouTube demo directory as a Git repository, create a corresponding repository on GitHub, set up any initial project files? I'm going to say exactly that. Yes, please. Yes, please. And now the final command that might be a little bit weird is this one called cd, which means change directory. And basically it's Claude allowing itself to move into the new directory that we've created. So the YouTube demo one, and it's doing something called git init. Now you might be thinking, Jamie, this is off track. Why are we going through all of this process when all I want to do is Claude Code and build a project? And the simple answer for that is that whilst you can absolutely skip all of this Git process and jump straight in later in the project, what you then can't do is do version tracking, save and back up your files, and it makes things a lot harder down the line if you just want to quickly test a process, push it into the cloud and test it on a live website. So we went ahead and pressed enter, and then you can see here that we've now got the readme has written, and then we've next command is bash gh version. So gh is like git, but it's the command line version, which is the one that Claude wants to use. So gh version. So let's check now if we've got gh installed. And again, it will help. And if you haven't, Claude will help you through that process. I already do. So we'll see here, I've already got version 2.83.1. And now it's going to check the status of the authentication. So is my GitHub command line, which is the one that Claude will use most of the time to talk with GitHub, is that got status permission to authenticate with GitHub? So I'll hit yes again. And you can see there we're not logged in, and it's recommending GitHub auth login. And indeed, that's exactly what's happening. And Claude's even telling us I need to authenticate. So let's do that now. So again, I'll go ahead and do that. And you can see that GitHub is giving us a one-time auth code here and is asking us to log in. So if I go and do this now, I will copy this code. I'll go to this website here, and then it asks us to paste in the code. So we'll paste it, press continue, authorize, use the passkey, and then we're connected. And you can see here we've got authentication complete, logged in. Now, this is almost at the very end of any of the complicated kind of terminology that you might not understand, but just to talk through it, to remind you, we've got cd, which means change directory. So it's moving again back into the YouTube demo folder. And then we're going to do GitHub repo create YouTube demo. So it's creating us that repo. So repo, if you're not sure, is kind of like an online folder where we're going to keep all of our code specifically for this project. So repository or repo is just for a specific project, and we're going to set that up now. It's then giving us information here. It's saying it wants to set it public. I might actually change that, and then it's choosing the source is going to be the current folder, and then it's saying the remote is origin, which is correct, and the description, a demo project for YouTube, which is what it is. However, because I'm not happy about the public, I don't want to make this repo public. So let's press that now. And there you go. No problem. I can create it as a private repo instead. Now we'll go ahead and do that. And you can see here we've now got bash. So change directory again, back into that directory. And then we're going to add the readme, and we're going to commit an initial message. And don't really worry too much about this, but this is Claude doing the job of saving and backing up our files into GitHub. So we go ahead and press yes. And then the final thing is we need to push it, which means we're going to upload it fully, and we'll go ahead and do that too. We need to do one more authentication just to make sure it's all secure, and we had permission to do that. And you can see now it has gone, and we're on main, which is like the primary area where you save your documents to. And you can see here we're on main, and it's all gone pushed, and there's a new branch. Main has gone to main, which is exactly what we want. And you can see further down here, your branch is up to date with origin main, which means the online version and what we have down here is the same. Nothing to commit, working tree is clean. And then Claude is even updating us and telling us, so if we don't even understand some of this, we can then say, excellent, your project is all set up. We've created a local directory, Git repository, readme, and a private GitHub repo created at this URL. And we can go and click on that URL, and we can see it on GitHub now. So if we click this, you can then see we are now inside GitHub, the GitHub website, because we're already logged in. And this is the readme file. And you can see here it's called YouTube demo, a demo project for YouTube getting started. And this is all we've done so far. Now, before we go ahead and really start building, there is one final thing which I want to cover. As you can see here, we've set up Git already, and we've now set up our first repo. But this is what I want to focus on, is to set up the user CLAUDE.md. So as a recap, we've got CLAUDE.md. It's like the settings file. We've got a user version, which is for all projects, and then we've got a project version, which we'll do in a bit. So I'm going to take this text now, I'm going to copy it. And a reminder, if you want to get this document or any of the documents I talk about in this video, if you go to the description below this video, there is a link there. If you click on the link, there's a free community where you can get all this information. So I've copied this text. And what I'm now going to say is, next, we need to set up our user Claude.md file. I want you to create it with the following text. And we'll paste the information there. After a few seconds, Claude said, there we go, it's going to create Claude.md. And I'm not quite sure whether it's going to create it in the right place. So I'm going to actually say no. And I'm going to say, just confirm where you are going to save this. And so at any time, we can always ask Claude, we can always stop it. If we're not sure, ask for more information, make sure that we are really happy with what's going on. So actually, it's about to do the wrong thing. I've specifically asked it to do the user, not the project. So I'm going to correct it and say, no, this isn't what I want to set the user project. This needs to be saved in squiggle / like our local user directory. It's like computer language, but as long as you know that squiggle / and then dot, and I'm going to do another /. So if you're not sure about that, just copy that as it is, and you'll be able to get Claude to make sure that it puts it in the right place for you. You want to set this up at the user level. Let me create the directory and save the file there. It's trying, it's already done that. Now it's going to write that file and it's saved that file. That is where we're going to stop for the setup process for Claude more generally. And then we're going to jump in now to setting up Claude specifically for our brand new project, which we've created. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do / and I'm going to do exit. So that is the way in which we leave a Claude session when we finish with it. I hit enter. And you can see now it's closed out. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is actually specific to Cursor rather than Claude, but any ID will work, is I'm going to go up and I'm going to open the folder that we've just created. So if you remember, if we look back up here in the history, you can see we created a folder called Git, and in that folder, we created another folder called YouTube-demo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into that folder with Cursor. So now I'm in my file browser, and you can see here we've got Git. So I'm going to click onto Git, and then here you've got YouTube demo. And if you click here, you should see there's a README file, which is the one we've just created. So that's good. And we're going to just click on that one. We don't need to click on anything else and choose open. And we're not going to save that file because I don't need to keep the old file. And now you can see on the left-hand side here, we've got this README file here. So if we click on it, then you can see, and this is in the markdown format here, which is a bit ugly, or we can come up to the top, right click, and we can choose open preview. And we get the pretty version, which is the same as we saw on GitHub itself. Just as a reminder, we can close the sidebar here, and we can close that down by pressing that. And again, we've got the agent bar here, which we don't need, so we can close that out here as well. And then we want to reopen the terminal down at the bottom. So we'll click that, and you can see it's now showing me I'm in Git YouTube demo, which is good. Yours might look slightly different to this. Don't worry about that. And all we now need to do is initialize Claude again. So we'll type Claude. Now, at this point, because we're starting Claude in a different folder, so originally we started Claude in our home directory. This time we're starting Claude in our project directory. So it won't remember any of the conversation we've already had, which is why I've stopped the conversation at that point. I'm going to start a new one in here now. And just to prove that to you, we can actually use some of the new commands that we've also got. So there are options when you start Claude, and one of the options is either to continue or to resume. So if you want to continue with the conversation you were just having with Claude from the same folder, you can just choose -- continue. And what you should see, yes, we trust it, no conversations found to continue. Now that, as I said, is because we are in a new folder. So instead of doing continue, you can choose to resume. Now, when you choose to resume, it will not give you the most recent conversation, but rather it will give you a list of all the conversations you've had in that folder. And then you can choose one that you want to resume. And again, we've got no conversations found because, again, we haven't had a conversation in this folder before. But if you have, then you can do that. So we'll start now, and we'll just start with Claude, and we get a brand new conversation. Now we've managed to open our project in Cursor. We have managed to start Claude again. And the next thing we want to do is Claude.md, but this time we want to do it for the project we've created. So if we go back up to our instructions further up here, you remember we've got Claude.md as the user. We've now set this up. We've added this text here, or your own version. Next we want to do is create a project level Claude.md. And here we've got a bit of text, which I'm going to start with. And rather than worrying too much about Claude.md for the project level, because this will take two different directions. You will either have pulled something from GitHub, if you know how to do that, or you've taken someone else's code, or someone's given you something already to start with, and you've got foundations, in which case you're probably going to ask Claude to generate a Claude.md file from the project that already exists, or you're going to start, as we are today, with a complete blank canvas. Let's start with the complete blank canvas, and let's go and have a conversation with Claude now to create that project, Claude.md. First, I'm going to just type something really general like, we are setting up a new project in here. I need you to create a project level Claude. And what we're going to do is we're going to be quite smart here. So rather than Claude just going off and creating a Claude.md, which probably doesn't serve our purpose, we can instead ask Claude to interview us to work out what we're going to make. Interview me. And specify here one question at a time, because otherwise Claude can fire off lots of questions and it's quite hard to respond to them. And there we go. I've just finished it by saying, interview me one question at a time to help me create a useful file. So we'll go on that. Before we carry on, I think it's worth mentioning that there is a slash command for this, which is /init, which is in it. And you can see here it initializes a new Claude.md file with code-based documentation. However, for now, what I want to do is start one from complete scratch, and we want to talk it through and work together with Claude to come up with the right solution. So I'm going to just tell it exactly what it is. So this is a demonstration for a YouTube video, which is exactly what it is today. So I'm going to say building a landing page for my AI consultancy called Velocity AI. So in terms of what tech stack, if there's any question that you don't know the answer to, you've got two choices. You can either say, I don't know, what do you recommend? And have a conversation backwards and forwards. Treat it like it is your technical expert, someone who you've actually picked up the phone to in real life, and have that conversation to understand and then tease out which one you think's best. Or defer completely and say, I don't mind. You choose which is best for you. In this instance, because it's just a demonstrator, I'm going to just go with whatever it recommends. In this instance, I'm just going to go with next because I quite like it and it's fast. So again, I could go more, less, I could be really specific or not. We can obviously change everything as we go through. So really, we're just getting started. And from my experience, it's better to get AI to create something and then you go, I don't like that, than it is to spend ages and ages trying to perfect it so you get it in what we call one shot. So you don't necessarily need to make AI get it right exactly the first time. Better to have something and then you identify, I don't like this bit, than it is to tweak and tweak and tweak and never actually get to the end. So here I'm just going to paste what we used before. So here a section with headline and CTA, 3 services, social proof, contact form, modern professional design. Great. So now we're coming into the reasoning why I think IDEs are so important to use. As I said earlier, we're using Cursor here, but you can use any IDE and you don't have to use an IDE. You can just use that terminal, but it does look a little bit not so pretty on the eyes. And if you're just starting out, it becomes very difficult because what you can see in here is obviously I've given it my information here. It's then responded and then it's written Claude.md, which is great. And then it's asking me the same questions that it asked me before. Do you want to make this edit? Yes. Yes, and allow all edits in future, or no and do something different. But what would also happen is inline here. So in this gap, there would be a little gap. And what you would see is this kind of sort of information, this change that's happened in a file, it would happen in line. So in this bit here, we wouldn't have these two boxes up here. And the reason why the IDE is good is because the IDE will show you up here where the file is stored. So we can refer back to it later. So we can see here it's YouTube demo folder and it's Claude.md. Fine. And we can see at the moment the file has nothing in it. So red is deleting kind of the first line, which is empty, which just means it's starting the file. And then green means it's adding all of this new stuff in, and we can scroll down and you can see it's added a total of 43 lines, and we can read through what it is here. So it says Velocity AI landing page, project purpose, tech stack, landing page structure, and it's just basically created a Claude.md file. And again, we can edit this, update it, change it, delete stuff. We can continuously iterate. But what it means is if we start a new Claude session down here in the future, and we want to do something different, then immediately the new Claude session will see, okay, we're in this project. We've seen the complete user settings, which we already created that Claude.md earlier. The very simple one. Again, we can iterate and edit that. But now if we're working in this project, we can see that these are the instructions that we're working on. So if we wanted to have one Claude that was working perhaps on the hero section, we could have another Claude working on the services, we could have another Claude on social proof, and we could have another Claude on the contact form. Now, obviously, you wouldn't necessarily need to have 4 different Claudes working all at the same time. And certainly when you're starting out, I would absolutely recommend just working with Claude one at a time, But as you start to build your understanding of this, it can be really, really powerful. So we'll go ahead now and we'll press OK. And again, you can see the feedback there. So it's written those lines. That's good. And if we wanted to now, just to give you a little bit more information on this arrow up here, we can click it and we can see all the files that now exist. So before we created the README, you'll remember, and we can see that README's here. And again, we can right click at the top and we can choose Open Preview. So it looks prettier. And that's how it will look. Good. Now we can do the same with the Claude.md file. So we click on it here. And again, it doesn't look very pretty, but we can go back to the preview tab now and we can see how it looks in preview mode. And you can see we've got the main header and the subheader, and we've got numbers and bullets. And this is all done in native MD Markdown file so that AI can read it very, very quickly and make a lot of sense of it. So finally, we'll just go back and we'll see, we can scroll down there, development notes. And again, just another reminder, we can iterate and prompt and change this. And if you wanted to change it yourself manually, if you spot something that's wrong, you can go back into the MD file here. So let's say, for example, the framework isn't next. Somehow AI's messed up, got confused, or we want to add a bit more information. We can either come down here and say to Claude, hey, Claude, you need to update the Claude.md file. We're not using next, we're using something else. Or if you want to, you can manually come in here and you can just delete, same as you would in Microsoft Word, and you can change it to React or whatever you want to. Now, for me, I'm not going to do that, but I just want to show you. One final little point here is the fact that the file is now blue and it's got the U on it. The U means that it's untracked, and that essentially means it's a new file that we haven't yet saved back to the cloud in our Git repository. So it means at the moment, if our computer crashed, we wouldn't be able to have this file. We wouldn't have it back on the cloud. So as we make changes, we do want to what we call push back to the cloud to make sure we've backed up all of our documents. For now, let's not worry about that. We will come back to it, but I just wanted to show you that that's there. So if we want to hide those files because we don't want to get confused with too much clutter, again, we can go up to the bar here, close it down, and we've just got this. Again, we can close all these files, and by closing them here, we don't delete them or lose them. So you can just click close and you can close the preview, and we're back to an empty screen in here, and we can continue with our Claude conversation down here. So let's see what Claude says. Done. I've created the Claude.md file with all the details we discussed, and the file includes good. This will help guide the development of the document. Ready to start building the landing page whenever you are. So we're almost there. And from future reference, we'll be able to come straight back into this project. We'll be able to start up Claude straight away, and we've got all of this information already ready to go, and we can continue this conversation. So let's say, for example, we wanted to quit this app now. The next / command we need to learn is /exit, which is here, and you can see it's in brackets. It says quit. So if you actually do /quit, it will also work, and you can hit enter, and there you go. Catch you later. We've left Claude. Now what I want to do is go back into that exact session, but there are two ways to do that. If you remember, we had Claude, and we go -- and we can either choose continue or resume. So if we choose resume, that will bring up the menu. If we do continue, it will bring up the last conversation. So if we had more than one conversation, continue will just go to the most recent conversation we finished. Resume will give us the option, so let's have a look. We should only see the one that we've just had. And you can see there, if we can't scroll down, so it does say B to toggle branch, / to search. We don't need to search, we don't need to change branch. We're going to go straight into this one here. So let's hit enter, and we're back into that conversation again. So next day, or if the computer crashes or whatever, you can come straight back in here and you've got the conversation back open again. So now we've opened the project in Cursor, we've started Claude again, and we have set up the project Claude.md. Now, before we move forward and actually get stuck into all the different things that Claude can do, I do just want to talk very briefly about a piece of technology called Docker. Now, Docker isn't really part of this tutorial today, but I do think it's worth explaining what it is and why it can be quite useful, particularly if you're starting out with building your own apps and you aren't somebody who wants to learn the code itself. It's useful for two reasons. One, it's useful because Claude can basically do all of the Docker process for you. So you can ask it things like, hey, I want to use Docker, and please help me to set up this project in a Docker container. But what is Docker? In order to understand what Docker is, it's also worth understanding how apps generally work. And if you want to skip this part of the process and you just want to focus on what Claude Code is and how to actually get Claude Code working, then jump to the next chapter of this video. However, for those of you that haven't yet made an app before or delivered successful projects for clients, I really would recommend you understanding this because it will give you a better foundation for then going forward with your Claude projects. Most, but not necessarily all, projects that you will build eventually will form a kind of process where you will see things like a front end, back end, and then a database. And a lot of people hear those terms, and you might have heard the term full stack, which kind of refers to everything both ways all the way through. And a lot of people are like, well, I don't really understand. Why do I need that? I just want an app. So let me just very quickly explain about how apps work, and then you will understand that. And it doesn't really matter whether your app is a iOS app on a phone, whether it's a web app deployed on a website, or something in between, or even something that's deployed on a computer as a kind of app that people can download and install. The process, generally speaking, follows the same concept. And the first is the front end. So let's just take a web app or a website. This is a fairly simple concept. And this is what you will see when you think of an app. This is the bit that you interact with. It's the bit where you can click on. It's the bit where you will enter information, hit enter to go and get your responses. In order to do that, though, you will need a backend. And the backend is essentially the computer. And what that really allows your app to do is to handle different connections, and it is the kind of the communicator. So your front end will talk to your back end. So when you say, I want to click on the next link of a website, that will then send a message to the server to say, hey server, we want the next page. And the server will then pass back the information for the next page. That's kind of how it works. But if, for example, your application was a lead magnet generator, and perhaps your front end was essentially a way to say, hey, if you want a bit more information about how I can help you with AI and automation, then download my free automation guide. And your clients do that. What your clients would then do is they would put their information into the front end here. That information would be passed to the server. And then the server would then create a new record for your new lead in your database. And this database can then be used later for many different things. It doesn't have to just be used for this one server. It could then go elsewhere, or the server can pull out information from the database and send it off to different things, for example, to your email or to automations and other kind of things that are very cool. We won't go into that today. But the database is then essentially their records, everything that's there. Think of it like a very fancy Excel spreadsheet. And the server is then a way that can look up in the database and can provide the information back. So, for example, the code in the backend would say something like, okay, this person submitted their details. Let's store their details. Yep, confirm it's now stored. Okay, then we're going to go back into the database and get a different thing. We're going to get the link, for example, to a lead magnet, and we're going to pass that link to the front end. Or we're going to just pass the actual document, and maybe it's already stored on the server. And that, generally speaking, is kind of the full stack process in very basic terms. And what we're going to do with Claude is probably build something that is a front end page. That's where we start often because it's the easiest part to visualize and to understand. And then we want to build a server that can then deliver our front end and make it look nice. And then eventually we'll want to build a database. Now, as you become more advanced, you might find that actually you start with the database and the structure because you understand this better. You then build a server which provides information to and from the database, and then you put the front end on top. But for now, I would definitely recommend starting with the front end because it's kind of what your user will experience and what your clients are going to be expecting. Two final notes here. One is Stripe and the other is passwords. In order to create an app which is secure, you're going to need passwords. Obviously, if this is just a website on the front end, you're not going to get people to log in. But if you create an app eventually, for example, as a software as a service, a SaaS, then you will need a login either as B2B or B2C. B2B being a business may have a login for their entire business, and then each of the employees within a business will have their own individual login, but they all belong to the same organization. So you've got organization 1, organization 2, but then you've got users 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6. Or conversely, B2C, which is just where you've got 100 different users, each of them has their own account. And finally, Stripe, which is the payment processor, because you're going to want to take payment potentially. And again, that will work with the server and then confirm to the front end that this person's paid and that this person has authentication in order to make those payments. Why is that all important? Why did I just go off on that little tangent to explain that? Because this is where Docker comes in useful. If you remember, we also talked about GitHub and about how we have different environments. And up here, we've got the local, the staging, and the production environments. And now we're starting to think, well, hold on, we've got 9 things now. So we've got front end, back end, database, and we've got local, staging, and production. This seems really, really complicated already, and I'm kind of getting lost already. Don't worry. I'm just giving you this as a broad brush understanding. You can always come back to this video later. The most important thing to understand is that all of these things exist, and you can talk to Claude if you're not sure about any of this and ask it to explain it. But where Docker becomes powerful later on is that you can create a Docker container. And a Docker container is basically a way to have a front end and a back end and potentially even a database that are all self-contained. And you can then, it's a bit like having an old school USB thumb drive where you can plug it in, you can save all your files, and then you can take it somewhere else. And in this case, you take it somewhere else, you put it onto the internet, onto a cloud deployment service, something like Render, Vercel, Railway. There are lots of different apps. And again, that's not the scope of this project today. But the reason why it can be useful is because you can get Claude to create those Docker containers for you. And then it makes it much easier to then be able to deploy your app. Once you've got it working locally, you can then deploy it into the cloud, into staging, to test it out on the cloud. And if you're happy with it in staging, you can then push it on again into production and then offer it to your client. Now we're back in Claude, and what I'm going to do is just get it to stop building us something. We've spent a lot of time setting up. We are not yet at the point where we understand Claude front to back, and I'm going to go into the advanced commands later in this video. But right now, I just want to see some actual progress and let Claude build something. Let it cook. Now, obviously, I've given it very generic guidance here, so it's not going to create something very specific. And the one thing that I can say, which is very, very powerful, is if you can get Claude to plan, you will have much more success at getting what you want than if you just let it go off. So there is a real trade-off between getting something started and having a look at it and then iterating from there versus planning as much detail as possible and then delivering it. Only you will find what works right for you. But personally for me, I find a reasonable plan taking maybe up to 30 minutes to create a good plan, and then asking Claude to start executing it really works. Again, if you're not sure, act like a CEO, act like the owner of a company, act like your client and say to them, this is what I want you to build. This is why you're building it. This is what it's for. I don't really know a lot of stuff, so ask me questions and you can guide me on what's going to build. All I'm going to type is start now and see what happens. And again, you can see that it's running some commands. So npx create. If you're not sure what any of these are, again, you can always come down here and ask Claude and say, what are you doing? What is it? Explain it to me if you want to know. Otherwise, crack on. Again, you can see here that it does say initialize next.js with TypeScript and Tailwind. So it does tell you what it's doing, but if that doesn't mean anything to you, by all means, go through, ask it questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question. And even if there is a stupid question, Claude will still answer it. And now you can see here that we've actually, interestingly, we've had some issues here. We've got npm warning, the following package was not found and will not be installed. And the directory files that could conflict are the two files that we've already had. So the directory already has files. Let me set up Next.js manually. So what's happened here is normally, if you're going to create a Next app, you'd normally expect it to have a completely empty repository, whereas we've already got a README and we've already got a CLAUDE.md, which we created already. So it's going to do it manually. That's fine. And again, you can see here now it wants to make this package.json. And this is what's over here, what it's creating, so we can review it if you're not sure. And again, if you don't understand what it is, don't worry too much or ask the question. I don't know what this is. What is it? Let's go ahead. And we're just going to let it run through. And what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to hold Shift and press Tab. And you can see down here that this should allow number 2. So let's do that instead. So Shift and Tab. Now you can see accept edits is on. And if we want to turn them off again, we can just hold Shift and press Tab again, and that will turn automatic edits off. But for now, I actually want to allow automatic edits to be on. And what we can do here again is we can track the files that are being edited here on the left-hand side. And now you can see we've now had a new folder created called app. And in there is the global.css. And now it's created the layout.tsx. And it's starting to create all the files that are needed for a basic app. Again, I'm allowing it to do all npm commands because this is a brand new app. I'm not really worried about it making any dangerous changes within this folder, within this directory. I've just started it. So for me personally, my risk tolerance, my comfort level is, yep, I'm happy for you to install whatever you need to install. Just carry on. As you get better at this, you will understand, okay, there are some things that I want to allow it to do. There are other things I don't. Personally, I would either go one way or the other. Either go very cautious, ask questions all the time, learn, understand, develop, or go to the opposite end of the spectrum and say, do you know what? I don't understand anything that's going on here. I'm just going to leave it to you. I'm going to trust that you're going to do it right and just build the whole thing and then guide them if it's not quite right. So now I've just pressed Control T and you can see down here, we've got a list of the tasks and which ones have been completed. So you can see that Claude is running through these different tasks here, and now it's at the point of it starting the development server. If you want to hide those, you can press Ctrl-T again, and it will hide all of the tasks. Okay, so you can see here now it's saying the Velocity AI landing page is now live and running at localhost 3000. And so we can test that out now. So if you aren't sure what localhost 3000 is, then it's really, really simple. Localhost is basically your own computer where you are now running locally. And all you need to do is type the word localhost into the browser as if it was a website. And then 3000 is the port that it's on, which basically is like a kind of route between the app itself and the web browser. So if you want to test lots of different apps, you use a different port for each of the apps. That then allows this app to run on port 3000, the next one could be 3001, the next one 3002, etc., etc. Doesn't really matter. All you need to make sure is you avoid a port which is being used by something else already. And if you're not sure if a port is available, then you can always ask Claude to check for you. Claude will go through that process. It will check, it will identify a good port, and you can carry on. You don't need to really worry about this. If Claude has a problem, it will tell you there's a problem and you can work it out together. And you can see here we've got a fairly basic web page that's now been built. And you've got the lead generation form down here. You've got the hero testimonials here. You've got the information about what you do. And then you've got transform your business with AI, big hero bit up here, and get started today, which takes us down to the contact page. Now, obviously, it hasn't got any images because Claude doesn't have access to images. If we already had images that we wanted to use, it'd be much easier. I really, really recommend, if you're going to do this sort of work, do not use AI generated images. Me personally, I just don't think that they are right for creating something like this. You've got plenty of free and paid photo websites like Shutterstock. I would definitely go to there. You can absolutely use Claude or any other AI model to ideate, to come up with the ideas of what images you should be looking for. You can then go and search for those on the different bases. But I wouldn't suggest using AI generated images at this point. It's not that they can't be used, and it's not that they can't look really, really good. It's that the prompting, so kind of creating the images, it's quite niche at the moment. It's quite hard to get good images. It's not impossible. If you do get good images, then absolutely use them. But my 2 pence, don't start with that. So what we can now do is we can now update the README, and we could iterate this project beyond this basic content. But now you can see we are able to iterate, and we can talk, and we can change things. So for example, if we wanted to make a change to the web page, let's say that we wanted to update Sarah Martinez, CEO of TechFlow Inc. Obviously, it's made up. Let's say that we actually did want a real testimonial, and let's say I want you to change the copy for the first testimonial to be from Jack Roberts in Best AI Builder Inc. Company. Okay, so now we've just asked it to make a change. It's very simple. It's only text change, I admit, but nevertheless, let's just see how it gets on with making such a simple change. It's now looking for where it is, and it's going to make that change. So what you can see here now is exactly what I was talking about earlier in the video, is that this is Claude now using Claude's internal process rather than using the IDE. So you can see here it said it's read the page, it's going to update the first testimonial to be from Jack Roberts at Best AI Builders Inc. And indeed, you can see that it's done JR. It's then changed it to Jack Roberts from Sarah Martinez. So the red, again, is the deletions shown by the minus as well. And the green is the plus. And you can see it's this file here with 3 additions and 3 removals. And then it confirms it's done the changes. Now, I don't know why Claude has immediately jumped to this, but that gives me a great opportunity to show you another / command. So if we /IDE, then that is the integrated development environment, as we've talked about before. If I press enter on there, we should select cursor, and now it's connected to cursor. I'm not really sure why it dropped off there, but we can always choose to disconnect cursor if we actually just want to do it in line, or perhaps we haven't got the ability to work with cursor for some reason. So let's go and now check to see whether that change has been made. And we can see here JR with Jack Roberts, CEO, Best AI Builders Inc. Brilliant. So now we've got a quote from Jack. And thank you for watching this. Hello, mate. Hope you're well. Now, let's say, for example, we don't like this blue, or our client doesn't like the blue. They want their corporate color, and their corporate color is like sage green, let's say. Okay, so let's now go and we'll make that change. Now we need to change the color with a U, because I'm British, not American, of the hero section from blue to green. Let's go with a sage green, something classy and British countryside. Let's see what happens. See how good a job it does. Okay, so that took about 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I think, to do that. So I've kind of skipped that bit of the video. But if we go back up, you can see that it has made a number of changes from here where I've asked it to do it, all the way down in lots of different files. And if, for example, we wanted to open this file here, the app.page, we can just hold, as it says there, Command, and click it. And then you can see now it's here, and we can actually have a look. And we can see that it was page line 155. It's been edited. So if we scroll down to line 5, then you can see that the changes have been made, and we've got BG Emerald. Let's go and have a look now to see if it's worked. There you go, something lovely and classy. And indeed, not only has it changed the hero section, but it's even changed the highlighting as well, without me actually explicitly saying it, which is really, really nice touch. And again, with a send message. So now it all works nicely together. And of course, what we can then start to do is get feedback from our clients at this point. And ideally, we can get Claude to help us to do this. So let's now say to Claude, this is a good start. Now, I need to generate a set of detailed questions for my client to answer about what they need from the Velocity AI website. We're keeping this really, really open because we're going to work with Claude to help us to be the best consultants that we can be. Claude is going to know what sorts of questions people generally need to ask in order to get the best results. If we can generate lots of information from our client about what they need, we can then feed this back into Claude, and Claude can then improve that. And we can then create the perfect website, app, landing page, whatever it is that your client needs. Claude has done exactly what we've asked for, but it hasn't done something which I think as a human would be implied, and most humans I think would naturally do. And what do I mean by that? We can see here that Claude has written client-questionnaire.md. So if we now command and click it, we can see it's here. And again, if we go up to the top and we can right click and we can choose to open the preview. So now we can look at the questionnaire in pretty format, and you can see all the different questions, all the different imagery, social proof, and that's really good, right? And obviously it's left some things here which we need to change. So you definitely need to read through this before you just fire it off to your client. But I would definitely use this or a version of this as a starting point to then create a questionnaire where you can then ask. And of course, Claude has then explained what the key sections are, and it covers everything from brand identity to technical specs, which is brilliant. Exactly what we want. If your client doesn't have the answer to the question, that's fine. You can then rework with Claude and then get more information. The one downside that I alluded to before is that Claude has created this file, client-questionnaires.md, and it's just created it in the root. And you can see that because it hasn't given us any path like ///. And you can see here, client-questionnaire.md, it's in the root of the actual app itself. Now that's not really best practice at all. We don't really want a questionnaire in the middle of our code. So what we need to do is point this out to Claude. I don't think this is the best place to keep the doc. Create a proper folder structure to house all docs, and then specifically client facing. And again, this is more common sense than about coding, right? You don't need to be a coder to understand that you would want your documents organized and sorted, but a lot of people forget this and then they end up with a complete mess of a project later on. And what I've now done is told Claude to do that. And you can see here it's made docs, client facing docs, internal docs, technical, and then it's moved the client questionnaire right into that folder there. So now we can see up here, instead of the file being here in the list as it was, we've now got a new folder called docs. We can click that, and you can now see that we've got client facing, internal, technical, and README, and then node modules. So we can ignore the node modules, but we can see here we've got client facing, internal, and technical. So let's have a look in here. Technical, there's a technical README. Internal, there's an internal README. And client facing, there's even a client questionnaire, which is the one we were focused on. So Claude has gone one further. It's not just created the client questionnaire that we asked it to create. It's also created 2 new READMEs, one internal and one technical. And it has explained what it's done right here. And it's shown you the structure. And then it said team only docs, technical is developer docs. So we can go and have a look. So internal documentation, and it's just basically giving a guideline. This is really useful. It's more useful than for your own team because you might be a team of 1. You probably are if you're watching this video. This is actually more useful because it's guiding a future Claude to go, okay, this is the internal documentation. This is what documents should belong in here. And then we can go into the technical here, and we can go to the README, and then we can see here in the preview, these are technical documentations and what types of documents should go in here, and then guidelines. And same for the client facing. We've again got the README, and we go to preview, and we can see that these are the different document types and the guidelines. And then we've already got our first document we've just created, the client questionnaire, which we can then send over to our clients. And so really that is a very simple but effective way to keep this organized. And again, just like everything else we're doing in this project, you can iterate it. You don't have to keep it the same. You can update it, you can delete it, you can change how you're doing things. If, for example, you don't want client-facing documents inside your code repository, eventually you might get to the point where you're like, do you know what? I'm going to keep it elsewhere, entirely out of here. That's fine. You can easily do that. Next, we're going to go over some of the slash commands and the planning process. So if we just jump in here and we zoom in to the slash commands, you'll see that we've already covered some of these. So the init is to initiate the repository, create the README file. We can do this very, very quickly just by typing /init. /help, I'll just demonstrate, is the same as actually if you just type the question mark. You can see here we get immediate information about what's going on. So just down here, you can see all these different options, and I'm not going to cover them all now, but I will in a moment. But then we've also got /help, which actually tells us broadly similar thing. So exclamation mark for bash mode, / for commands, hash to memorize or pound. And then we've got here double tap escape to clear the input, Control O for verbose output edits, tab to toggle the thinking, shift command for a new line. And then over here, Control and underscore to undo, and Control Z to suspend, and Control V to paste images. Now, I find pasting images easier to drag and drop, and we'll show you all of those in a moment. You'll also notice that here we've got general commands and custom commands. So what we can do here is press tab to move between these three. So if we press tab, you can see now we're into commands, and these are the commands that already exist. And again, using the arrow keys on the keyboard, we can move down, and you can indeed see these are all the different available commands we have. Quite a few. And then if we tab again, we can see custom commands. And at the moment, we haven't got any custom commands set up. That's later in the video. Now back to general. First of all, exclamation mark for bash mode. So if any of you aren't familiar with what bash is kind of that original shell that we saw. It's the original kind of terminal before we go in. So if I just open up a new one here, I should point out here, it's actually quite useful to understand, but this little plus button here, or the delete, this delete closes this whole window down. But this plus adds a new second window. So if we press plus, we can now see we've got the original Claude Code up here. And if I can right click it, and it's slightly off the screen, but I can choose rename. And then I can choose to call it Claude Setup. Okay, so I'll call that Claude Setup just to remind me that's the one that we're setting up the whole Claude process. And then we've got here ZSH. Now, ZSH is like a form of bash, but if I choose here, you can see we've got bash itself. So it's gone. But my default is ZSH, which is a slightly different version, but it's similar. So here you go. You've now got bash, and this is what bash looks like. And bash is kind of that computer input code method. And this is what we can do straight within Claude. So if we come in here, all we have to do is press exclamation mark, and you can see now it's gone red and it says for bash mode, which is essentially the equivalent of opening up a new terminal here. And so if I choose to say echo hello world, echo is just basically saying, say this, and I press enter, you can see there the output is hello world. So it's done exactly what I wanted. And if I use another command, which would be, for example, the ls, so the list la options. So again, that was just listing everything that's in the current folder that we're in. And if I press enter, what you can then see is the beginning of 15, 16, 17 total lines. And what it is all of these files here are listed out. Now, the reason I can't see all of these 15 lines is because I need to press Control O, and it does tell you that here. And again, it tells you that if you do /help, remember, it also tells you here Control O for verbose. So now if we do Control O, we can now see we've got more verbose. So it's basically showing us all the different information here. But when we scroll to the bottom, you notice how we're now missing the text box. So we need to now Control O, and we can get it back again. So this just keeps it neat and tidy so we can skip up and look for things very quickly. But if we want the full information, Control O. If we continue now with the help file, so we've done bash commands, We've already seen / for commands. We're going to cover more of the commands later. And then pound is to memorize. Okay, so if there is something that we want Claude to remember on the Mac, it's Option button and the number 3. On Windows, I'm not sure, it's probably actually on your Windows keyboard. I think it might be on the bottom left. But you can see now, as soon as I've done the pound or the hash symbol, it now says hash to memorize. So add to memory, try always use descriptive variable names or whatever it is that you want to do. Let's say, for example, ensure to always include descriptions about what you're doing when running commands. So that maybe just help. And then we've got a choice here. And I think this is really important to understand. What we're really doing is we're updating the Claude.md file. And here again, you've got the point I made at the beginning of the video. You've got 2 Claude.mds. Is this something that you want Claude to remember across any project that you're in? If so, it's in the user memory. Or is this something you just want it to remember for this project? Is it specific to this project? Is it really important for this project, but actually a different project might use something completely different? Only you will know the answer to that question, so you have to choose. In this case, I think I've gone quite generic, so I'm going to include that across all my projects, and I'm going to choose the user memory. And now it's been added in. Now, if I go back to /help again, we can see we've covered off ! We've covered off / and pound. Double tap escape to clear the input. I think that's fairly simple, but I'll just show you that. For example, if I started to put a text I don't want, escape twice, and it disappears. Now, sometimes you get this slightly annoying like quiz, how's Claude doing? We can say it's doing bad, fine, or good, or just dismiss it. I'm going to just press 0 and it's gone. Just to note, it's not the end of the world. Continuing on help, we've done the output verbose, tab to toggle thinking. So the next one here, I think I've covered this earlier in the video, but just in case you missed that, if you tab, you can now see over here, thinking is off, tab to toggle. Now it's back on again. So just pressing that tab button turns thinking on and off. One thing you can also do is the word ultra think. And now can you see how it's gone colorful here? This is because this is like deep thinking mode for Claude. So what we can say now, ultra think, what tech stack should we use to deploy this onto the internet as quickly, cheaply, and efficiently as possible? And now it's going to that extra process of thinking. It's going to use more tokens, so it's going to be a more expensive process. Obviously, if you're on a paid plan rather than the API, it just means it'll use more of your budget for the month. When you get to the end of the budget, you either have to wait a certain amount of time, or you can essentially pay to upgrade to get more tokens, more allowance quicker. So that didn't take very long at all, but it was a fairly simple question, to be fair. And it's now saying here, best for deploying this next. Here's my analysis. Vercel's very good. Alternative, Netlify, Cloudflare, Railway, and Render. Cool. Vercel. And I would probably agree. Vercel is very easy to use, but if you wanted to go backwards and forwards, you could definitely have conversations about what these things are, why it's good, if it's not good, etc. So that's ultra think and think tab mode. So if you just want it to just get on with stuff and do stuff, then turn thinking off. If you want to keep working through as we are at the moment, then leave thinking on. We've done Control T, which is just showing the to-dos and turning them off. Shift and enter for new line. It's fairly self-explanatory. Undo, suspend, and that covers off most of the general commands. Now, if we go across into commands, I've already mentioned these already, but this is kind of telling you what the default commands are. And of course, you can access these very simply by just pressing the / and then scrolling down when you're actually in the conversation. And you can scroll down here. For example, if we want to go to, it will tell you all the different information about each of the different / commands. If we go into /status next, you'll see here we have got, again, 3 tab section and tab to cycle. So status just tells us the version we're on, the session ID, and the current working directory. That's CWD, so that's the folder we're in, the login methods, max account, and then your organization and the email address that's linked with it, which I've blurred out. And then, of course, we've got the model that we're on, so default Sonnet 4.5, smartest model for daily use. And we can indeed change that in the config here. So if we now go tab across to config, you can come down here to the model, and instead you can choose to go for Haiku 4.5, which is faster, but not as intelligent, or Opus. Now, this is the legacy Opus rather than Opus 4.5, so I would recommend sticking with Sonnet 4.5. And then the final tab here is the usage tab, which we can also check a different way. And you can see here, current session, we've used 1% of our current context window. So this is our current memory. And then this week, which resets in 4 days time. So it's been pretty lax this week, but it has been Christmas and New Year. And you'll see that it resets on the 8th of January, 7:59 a.m. in London time, only 12% used. So I've got a good amount to go. Now I won't do clear, but /clear, as you can see here, it resets or creates a new conversation. And what that essentially does is it kind of closes down, in inverted commas, the current conversation and starts up a fresh conversation. Now, the good thing here is that if you accidentally did this, you can actually get it back by going to /resume, and then you can choose from the list that we've already seen before. Or if you weren't in there, you could do Claude --resume, obviously not within Claude, but if you were on the terminal itself. /compact. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that we saw the memory bar that Claude has a certain amount of context window. Now, if you've been working with AI before, you'll understand what that means. But for those of you that perhaps haven't really understood the depths of AI yet, AI kind of has 3 different memories. That's the way I like to think of it. It has a long-term memory, which is the memory that is created by the AI companies themselves. So it's what AI is trained on. That's the P of the GPT, the pre-training. That is all the information that it already has, that it's had for a very long time. And then you've got the short-term memory, which is akin to you being able to remember your first pet's name, was your long-term memory, but then somebody coming to you and giving you a list of 20 things to remember right now. You probably can't remember all of them because your short-term memory kind of gets overloaded. That's kind of what AI is referring to as context. Context window are getting larger for AI models. However, no matter how large they are, they're always still at some point kind of fill up. Claude has got a fairly clever way of doing this. In the past, it used to just fill up and then used to crash and just say, oh, that's it, no more space, start a new conversation, which was super unhelpful. Now the way that Claude works is it does something called compacting, and it will auto compact when it gets full. It will just jump and tell you, okay, I'm going to start auto compacting. It does take a few minutes, so you are kind of stuck. It's a good time to go and put the kettle on if that happens, but you can also manually compact it. So if, say, you're at 80-85%, you can choose to compact it, particularly good if you're at the end of a section that you wanted to complete and you want to continue in the same conversation, but you want to make sure you've got a fresh run, a fresh context window to go at. The way the context process broadly works is it asks Claude essentially to write down a list of what's happened so far, kind of like just a brief summary and where you're up to right now, and then restart with a fresh window and only that document to reference back to rather than every single bit of the conversation. This is really good, but there are better ways to do this. And one of the ways that I'm using, which I'm going to talk about in the very end of this video, is the development tools process, whereby I'm creating PRDs, which is product requirement document. And I'm also creating a task list. This way, it's essentially like CLAUDE.md for the project, but you can have many, many PRDs. So CLAUDE.md is for the whole project. So in this case, for the whole of the website. But then you can have a PRD, which would be perhaps specific to your lead magnet or specific to your hero section or specific to a certain part of the app. And then you can have a task list, which is linked to that PRD. And what you can then do is you can run this across as many Claudes as you want, different Claudes, new Claudes, compact, it doesn't matter because it goes back and looks at, okay, this is the task that I'm on right now. So Claude.md goes, okay, this is holistically what the project's about. The PRD is, okay, this is the task I'm focused on right now. And then the task list is how do I complete this PRD? And I'll go into that in more detail, but that is very useful and it means that the compact process becomes a non-issue. But if you need to compact, that's how you do it. Next, we've got /doctor, which, as you might imagine, helps to diagnose and verify your Claude installation in settings, as it says right there, but it's Doctor, it's just checking how it's running and making sure it's working. Now here I've got warnings saying multiple installations found. That's primarily because I have installed it once for what I've been doing for many, many months now, if not years, and once for this demonstration. So that's fine, but I will remove this after I've done the demo. And finally, /config, which allows you to work on the themes. So here, useful, auto compact. I always have it on as true. For me, I don't mind it being on. For some people, they might say, no, I don't want it to auto compact. I'd rather make the decision to compact it myself. If it gets to the end and says it's full, then I'll bear the brunt of that and I'll deal with it. Show tips, you can turn that off if they're annoying you, but certainly when you're starting, it's helpful. Rewind code, have checkpoints. Again, I don't know why you turn that off, but for some people, maybe it helps not do that. I don't like verbose output, but if you're learning, you might want that to be on. Respect git ignore in file picker. Now, this is something we haven't covered yet, so I will just explain this. Now, in this file structure here, you can't actually see it at the moment because we haven't got one, but you can create a dot. The dot basically means it's like a system file or a hidden file, and .gitignore is, unsurprisingly, a file which contains all of the files that Git should ignore. Now, what does it mean to ignore a file? Essentially, if you've got secure files like password files and things like that in your project, you would naturally not want to upload those onto GitHub, particularly if you were going to have a public repository where other people could use your code, or vice versa, you're using other people's code. What you don't want to do at this point is upload those documents. It could also be things like Claude could do lots of tests, or it could pull lots of information, and that might be useful for debugging and for solving a problem, but you don't actually need it as code. So you'd want to include those files in gitignore. Again, work with Claude, identify what your gitignore file should include. You could even ask Claude to create one, and we can do that in a moment. But the choices here in the settings is, do we want Claude to acknowledge and recognize that? The answer is generally, yes, we do. Theme, we set it up at the beginning, but you can change it here. Notifications, automatic. Output style, editor mode, model, diff tools, and then auto IDE extension is true. So the auto IDE extension is where it should pop up here, but although it seems to have stopped that in the last few minutes. But this is just in the settings. And again, we've seen status already and then the config. So that's fine. Now, one other thing that can be very, very useful is if you want to specifically ask Claude about a file. So for example, if you notice here, we've now got 1, 2, 3, 4 different README files. 5. We've got 5 different README files, okay? So why have we got 5 different README files? Well, the answer is we've got a README file at the top here. This is about the project itself. And if we close that, we can see here, this is the project. We've then got a README file in the main docs area, and it explains that this is how the documentation section is organized. So it's got client facing, it's got internal, it's got technical. And then you've got one of the READMEs for each of those sections to explain in more detail, which is useful, but slightly confusing. And we might want to update one of those files. So if we said we wanted to update the root one to update the project, I could say, now we've started to build out our app. Let's update and we can then use the @ symbol to reference a file, readme.md. Now you can see here, it's slightly confusing because we've got a lot of different READMEs here. Actually, we've not just got the ones we've already identified, we've also got ones inside the node modules. Now I'm not too worried about those, but you can scroll down to find any of the other files that are relevant. Now we actually want the root README, so there's no path before it. So that's nice and easy. We will just use that one, and we can then press either return or tab, and we can then continue. So let's update the README file to ensure it's as useful as possible for others. We can then hit return, and we can now watch the README file being updated. And I have just skipped the video a little bit because it did take a few seconds. It took about a minute. But if we scroll back up, we can now see it's added all of this information, and we can go into the actual file and have a look. But you can see here, it's added 182 lines and removed 3 lines. We scroll all the way to the bottom, and then Claude is going to tell us what it's done, which is fine. If we want, we can go and check it out. We'll go up here, click, and then we'll go to preview again. And you can see now that this is how it looks. It's been updated to include the hero section, services, social proof, contact form, and the tech stack, so that it's starting to become useful for the next person or next AI agent that comes along to understand what's going on. The final thing we'll do to close out this basic setup section is just to talk about saving our files back to GitHub. So at the moment, I'm assuming zero knowledge of GitHub, apart from what I've already explained to you in this video earlier. You now know that we have set up GitHub. We're now connected to GitHub. We've created a repository on the internet so that our code can be saved there. But at the moment, our code has not been saved. I think the only file that is saved to the cloud was the original README, which we've now changed. So again, assuming zero understanding of how this works, let's just talk to Claude in normal language and say that what we want to achieve. I think we should now save our app to GitHub. How do we do this? Never be afraid of not knowing. Just ask Claude, and if Claude really can't help you, then ask Claude what it can help you with. Just keep going until Claude can help, because it pretty much can help. So here you go. Look, I'll help you save your app to GitHub. Let me first check what we have and then walk you through it. Good news, you already have a GitHub repository connected. Now remember that this Claude session, we created a new one because we actually set up the GitHub with the old Claude session. So this one doesn't realize that we're already working with GitHub. We've already got it, but it's confirmed we've already got it. It's then said it needs to create a git ignore to exclude the files that shouldn't be in GitHub, like the node modules. So that's good. It's then created that for us. And now it's going to save all the work to GitHub. So first of all, it's going to add, and the dot means everything in this project. So we're going to say, yes, that's fine. And then we're doing something called a commit. And a commit is kind of like a mini save. It's not actually pushed it up to the cloud to save it into the cloud. But what it's done is it's kind of created like a waypoint or a marker with information to say what's happened so far. So you can see the message that it's created here. So that -m means message. And we've now got build complete velocity AI landing page with next.js. It's then explained what was happened, and it's added a little created with Claude to confirm that it was Claude that did this commit, and it's co-authored by Claude. So do we want to proceed? Yeah, absolutely. So once we've added all the files, we're then going to give it a message, a kind of like a checkpoint. And then the final thing is we're going to push. So we want to git push, and that then sends it to the cloud. It sends it so that we've saved it, so that we can go to any other computer in the future, and we can then get those files and continue working from any other computer which has access to our own repository, which at the moment is private. So that would be only you or your account if you're logged in. Nobody else can see it. Of course, you can make it public in the future so others can see it. And then the double and then the git status means once it's run the command git push, it then wants us to run the command git status, and basically it's going to check, has everything worked correctly? So do we want to proceed? Yeah, we do. Great. Okay, so now you can see here, Claude's giving us feedback. Your app's now saved to GitHub. What's just happened? It's created the git ignore. It's committed everything, saved our code. It's pushed it to GitHub. It's now live. We can go and check it out on my GitHub page. And what's on GitHub now? Tick, 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 tick. And we can visit the URL to see the code. Now, the very last thing I will just talk about is this little thing down here, which popped up a little while ago. I don't know if you spotted when it did pop up, but it's the npm run dev. And basically what that is, a little bit of code that Claude is running in order to show us the website. Now, if we pop over to the website itself, this website here is currently being hosted on localhost, as we can see over here. And it's only being able to be shown because Claude has kind of got a bit of code running in npm. So if we go back to Claude now and we press the down arrow, you can see now it's highlighted this npm run dev. And if we hit enter here, we can then see we've got background tasks. It's one active shell. A shell is kind of like it's kind of this basically. These are shells over here, 1, 2, 3. So we've got one shell running in the background. So we can hit return, and you can see here we've got enter to view, K to kill, or escape to close. And if there was more than one, we could press up and down, but that isn't right now. So let's press enter to view. And we can see that we've got compiled, and we've got get, and that just basically means someone's loaded the website. So if I go back to the website, I can refresh it, and we've indeed just had another get request, and that's just all that's happening there. So we're going to press K to kill, and you can now see up here, it says it's killed, and it's been running for nearly 4 hours. It just shows you how long we've been recording this video for. And we're going to press escape, enter, or space to close. So spacebar, and we've closed, and you can see it's now disappeared from here. But if we go back to the website now, it looks like it's still here, but if I refresh, it's now not working. That's because we've stopped the application from running the front end for us to see. Now we can press /exit, and we've now left Claude, and we can close down this project. We can close down the cursor window. We can close absolutely everything down, safe in the knowledge that we've kept all our code. It's now backed up to the internet, so that if something happened to our computer, no fear, we've got it all there. Not only is it there, but it's documented, and we're ready to go for the next session to continue on with this project once we've had the feedback from our clients. Now, it is worth mentioning just before we close out this session that if you didn't run the Git process and your application crashed, the great thing about Cursor and about Claude is that unless Claude was in the middle of an actual action, all of the files that have been created are still saved and available for you to access on your computer. But it is, of course, best practice to push things up to the cloud into GitHub to make sure they're backed up and ready to use. And what I'll now show you in GitHub, as you can see, what we had originally was just the README, and you can see here there's me and then there's Claude, and we've both been working on this internal commit with README. Now, if I just refresh this page, you'll actually see that we've got a ton more documents, and these documents are reflective of our project in Cursor. So these documents here apart from the ones in the git ignore and the git ignore itself, are now here. And you can see that we've also got the updated README here. And we've got installation information, available scripts, the project structure, and this is really helpful. And then we've got links to the client-facing, the internal, and the technical docs. So if we go to the client-facing docs, we can click here, and we can indeed see information about what client docs should be saved here. And we've even got the client questionnaire. So if we click through, then we can see we've got the client questionnaire ready for us to send to our client to get further information and then continue on with this project. Now we're going to significantly ramp up a gear, and this part of the tutorial is going to be more complicated. So if you have just essentially binge watched the first half of this video, first of all, well done for sticking with me for so long. But second of all, I would say you probably at this point need to go away and have a go and play with Claude, copy, emulate, try out, get wrong, learn from your mistakes, and at least spend, 24 hours up to a week just using Claude, getting to understand it, and really getting to grips with it. All right, disclaimer over. If you've already used Claude Code before, this is the part of the video that's highly likely to be very, very useful for you. If you are someone who just wants to binge watch the whole thing, then please feel free to continue and learn, and hopefully you can extract the value from this second half too. Now I want to talk about what's on screen here, and we can see the who, how, and the what. And this really is thinking into much greater depth about how we use AI, and specifically in this instance, Claude Code, to best effect. First of all, we've got the who, and this is what I'm going to call agents, or as Claude calls them, sub-agents. So at the moment, we've been focusing entirely on one who, which is Claude Code more generally. And we've asked Claude Code to do everything, and Claude Code has been kind of like our uni character. It's been a bit of a knight, bit of a wizard, and a bit of a corporate boardroom salesperson, okay? So it's been everything. It's been all things to all people. We haven't given any specialist skills or any specialist tools at this point, although we have asked it to do certain things. So it does have some tools, as we've already used, the slash commands, so we can find out information about how much context we have left, or a few other bits and bobs. So you've obviously seen that there are some tools, but they're not kind of specialist tools. They're very generalist. But when we go into the next section, we're going to talk about subagents. And subagents is kind of like the Who. And what I mean by the Who is not the famous music band, but I mean what kind of person, and it's not about the skills yet, that's coming in a second, not the how, but what kind of a person do we want? And what kind of a model do we want? So there's always a trade-off with all AI. And we can choose the most complex, the most advanced, and the most knowledgeable model, but it's going to be slower. And that's kind of, I suppose, a little bit like the wizard here in the image. The wizard is going to be physically slower, although I'm sure some of you experts in wizards would tell me that wizards can move very quickly if they use magic. But let's assume we're not going to use magic for a moment. We've got a wizard. He's old. He's slow when it comes to physically moving around. So he's probably not ideal for going and fighting dragons in a kind of conventional way. However, if we do want to fight a dragon, then probably would be a young knight, someone who has got lots of fitness and they're very fast and agile, but they don't necessarily need to know a whole heap about the world. They certainly don't need to know about corporate boardroom sales, but what they do need to know is how to use a sword, and they do need to know how to use a shield, and they need to be able to be fit, healthy, and fast. Or if we want to send someone into a corporate boardroom and make a sales pitch on our behalf, we probably wouldn't want the wizard because he'd look a little bit out of place, particularly in San Francisco or somewhere, probably London as well, although less so nowadays. And the knight would also look fairly out of place, and neither of them have the right skills. Okay, the wizard might be able to perform some magic and convince them by magic that they should make the sale, but that's not really what we're looking for. It's not ethical, and the knight could potentially force them into it by threat of death. Again, it's not really what we're looking for. The boardroom person here would be the right person to use. So we need to think about which agent to use. We'd start off with Claude Code generally, and then we'd move on to, right, okay, which person, which agent, which model do we want to use for which task? The next part, though, is the how. So actually at the point of the who, we don't necessarily have that kind of persona of wizard, knight, or boardroom person. We probably only really have something like fast person, slow person, old person, very knowledgeable person, knowledgeable about specific areas. Still useful, but we haven't really gotten down to the kind of unique knowledge. Now, traditionally, and I say traditionally, I'm talking in the last 12 months, subagents were kind of a fudge of the who and the how kind of smashed together. And a lot of what I've seen in the last few months around agents has been exactly that. It's been a kind of, oh, no, this isn't just choosing a model. It's also it's kind of giving it a brief and a system prompt and a few other bits and bobs, which kind of was the how that they should do it. It was kind of their like brain. If you think about Neo in the Matrix, where he kind of gets plugged in and he says, I know Kung Fu. It's like, that's what we were trying to achieve. However, Anthropic have now made a serious leap forward with this process, and they've actually created something called skills, which we'll go into in the second part of this part of the video. And that skill is kind of like the knowledge that you need. So for the knight, it would be, how to use a sword, how to use a shield, where to stick the pointy end in the dragon, where do dragons hide, when are they good to attack, all that kind of stuff. For the wizard, it might be all the different spells that they need to know. It might be some things like potions, and it would be all the kind of things that wizards would traditionally know. But it would also be that kind of persona about being perhaps not rushing into things, understanding, reflecting, slowing down, thinking, processing, perhaps where the knight would go rushing in to save the princess. And then, of course, the boardroom person may need to be a little bit proactive, may need to really drive that wedge in to convince that sale that needs to happen. And they need to be, up with the lingo and talking in the way in which the people that he's pitching to talk. He needs to have a good understanding of the product he's selling, and he needs to be able to convince people and sell to those people, perhaps where a wizard and knight does not. So that's the kind of the how, and the way in which skills work, which we're going to come on to, is a very, very smart way of having that how available without bothering the original, kind of the primary Claude code with all of that information about how to do all of those things. So we're not jumping everything onto the first agent. We're giving the agent the option to use these other personas later if needed. And then finally is the what, and that is the tools. So again, with the knight, we want to give the knight a sword. With the wizard, we want to give them the staff. And with the boardroom person, we want to give them the PowerPoint slide or the flip chart or whatever it is. And these tools could be in real terms, something like access to a database. So if, for example, we wanted to create an agent that was a deep thinker, financial specialist, we might use one of the more advanced thinking models that's slightly slower. We don't need quick answers. We want something that's right and takes time to do. We might give it the skills of a financial accountant or an auditor. We might give it the skills of a data analyst. And then we would give it the tools to access our database with all our financial information, along with any other relevant financial information, perhaps a financial report from last year and the preliminary one, which is going to be for this coming year. And that's how we would look in real terms when we're actually talking about AI. A secondary example might be that we want to use a social media bot, for example. This might be something that we want to do and have as a less intelligent model, but a faster model. Perhaps we want to crank out posts or tweets or whatever it is, and we want to do this quite quickly. So we don't want the most advanced, most expensive model. We just want a kind of basic model. We want to give it the skills of being a social media manager or a content creator, and perhaps we want to train it on some of our favorite content creators so we emulate their style, but inject a bit of our own unique personality as well. So that would be the skills. And the tools might be an MCP model into being able to work with X or YouTube and being able to post straight into something like TikTok. Or maybe it's just that it's going to schedule them and then prepare them for draft so that we can then review them and make sure that we're happy with whatever it is. That's the kind of way in which we're going now with AI, and particularly with Claude Code. That's kind of it from me for this section. And now we're going to dive deep into the actual subagent section and how to set all of that up. Now on to the delegation part. So subagents. What are subagents? How do they work? First up, why? Why would we want a subagent? Well, the answer is subagents provide opportunities for specific purposes to fine-tune using a specific model, for example. They're reusable. So once we've created an agent, we can start a new conversation and we can have that agent pulled into a new conversation. They're pre-configured and ready to go. They have their own context window, and this is actually one of the most powerful reasons to use agents, I believe. It allows you to, for example, have a main conversation going on. You get to a certain point. Oh, I need to stop. I need to solve this problem. I'm going to use a subagent to solve the problem. Problem gets solved, and then the problem and the output and the response and the solution gets passed back to your primary Claude terminal that you're using. just gives you the answer. That stops you from going on a complete trajectory of a project from A to B and then suddenly getting bogged down in a specific thing, which then takes the whole conversation off in a different direction, which then means you lose the context of the original plan because you've gone completely down a rabbit hole. And if you have been coding for a while using Claude Code or other tools similar, you will know that this is a genuine reality. You can configure specific tools with specific agents. And this is quite a useful thing because if you don't want to give all the tools to Claude to start with, you can just ask it to hand off the task to an agent that does have the right tool. Equally, if you only want to give an agent certain tools but not access to others, again, this allows you to do that. And then finally, the 2 points that I made earlier in the intro section is that you can give it custom permissions. For example, you can ask it to accept edits, bypass permissions, you can give it the ability to plan or not to plan, or you can give it the default from the main agent. And as I alluded to before, you can give agents a custom system prompt, and in fact, you absolutely should. But Skills, I believe, is going to replace the requirement to give really detailed system prompts. And actually, too detailed a system prompt will end up clogging up your context window anyway. So how do we start a subagent? Well, there are basically 2 ways to do that. One is by request. You can ask in the Claude terminal, use subagent blah, or use X subagent, whatever it is. And secondly is automatically. Claude will just figure out, given what you're asking it to do, hold on a minute, I've got an agent, I've got a subagent that I can use for this task. I'll delegate it down, let it crack on, get my response, and then I'll continue my process once I've had that response. So what's inside of a subagent? Well, first and foremost, the really important part is the name, how to refer to it. So what are you going to call it? What is Claude going to look it up to find it? Next is the description. This is primarily so both Claude can find it, but also so that you can understand and any other users that you may have using your agent can find and understand what this agent's purpose is. The model, as I talked about earlier, speed versus intelligence and cost to a point, and the tools. So what tools are you going to give it access to? Commands, MCPs, are they auto-inherited or are they going to be specific to that agent? I should say at this point that tools are auto-inherited by default, but you can change that. Skills conversely are not inherited, but you can, as an option, provide specific skills. And this, I believe, and I'll talk about that in the skills section, is where agents are going to come into their own and become exceptionally powerful. And then permissions, as I've already said, you've got to tell it, is it allowed to read, write, what other commands can it do, and what changes can it make? And finally, the system prompt, which is the context for Claude to know what its role is. And that's how you put together an agent. And there are actually some built-in agents which come with Claude. So for example, there is a general purpose agent, which is essentially a clone, a mini clone of the first agent that you use. There's also a plan agent, which you may have seen, and we talked about when you use planning mode. There's the explore, which essentially gives Claude the ability to go and look through your files to understand what's there and to figure out what it needs. And then, of course, there's custom agents, and that's where it becomes very powerful for what you are trying to achieve for your specific project. And some classic examples of what you might use an agent for, to be specific, is a code reviewer. So something that looks through your code before you commit it and send it off to the cloud. Perhaps a debugger, which identifies issues and problems, or a data scientist, as I said in the previous section. Just like CLAUDE.md and many of the other config files, agents are written at 2 different levels again. So one is at the project level, which is project by project. So each project that you stand up a new Claude for will be a new opportunity. And then at the user level, so across every project that you do as your user, then all those agents will be available. And I think it's worth noting here, as I've put, that the user Claude has lower priority than the project. So for example, if you had 2 agents of the same name, let's say, for example, you had 2 debuggers, but you had a debugger in the project area and you had a debugger in the user area, then Claude would prioritize going to the project debugging agent first and only if they were both there. However, if there wasn't one in the project level, then it would fall back and use the debugger from the user layer. This is quite powerful because it then means that if you want to have a generic debugging agent, you can have one in your agents at user level, but then if you want to make it specific to a project, you can add an additional one in, and you can do that for any of the agents too. I'm not going to cover it in detail here today, But there is also the option of chaining agents together, and we can also create plugins, which is basically an agent which you've created, and then you can package it up, zip it together, and you can send it over to your colleagues so they can then use the same agent. Fairly simple to do. There's plenty of detail and documentation on Claude's website on how to do that. So you can see here that I've drawn out the requirements for what the agent file needs to have. Now let's go ahead and create our first agent. So just to show you, this is Anthropic's actual Claude Code docs, and I just want to show you how easy it is. So basically you start off with 3 dashes at the top, and then you work as follows: name, colon, space, give it a name, then description, give it a description, tools. These are the tool names, so you need to make sure that you get the names right and that they do match the tools that you actually have. Model, again, you need to make sure that you use the right name of the tool. Permission mode, I would probably go with default unless you have a specific one, and you can come into the Claude docs to check what other permission modes there are. And skills, which we haven't come onto yet, but we will come onto later, so obviously leave this blank to start with. 3 more dashes, and then we want the system prompt. Now, if you already know exactly what you want from a certain agent, then it's very easy. I would just start this process. But let's say, for example, that you're not that experienced, and actually what you'd really like is a really good agent to help you create PRDs. If you're not sure what a PRD is, it's a product requirement document. And essentially it is a way that you can take a high-level concept and convert it into a set of work that an engineer, that a developer can actually build out. Normally comes paired with a task list, which are things that you can get Claude to check off as it's done one thing after another. Now, let's say, for example, we are only in a high-level mode, and what we really want is a product manager, a PM, that would come along and take our kind of CEO's intent and convert it into actionable steps for the engineers and developers to actually build out. I'm no expert, and I'm no expert in how to create PRDs. I've never been a product manager. I understand the concept of it, but I'm definitely not an expert. But I kind of do know what I want, and I also know what I don't want. And I find it very, very helpful to use AI in this capacity to start by creating a first principle document that I can then edit, change, and make how I want it to be. So I'm going to jump over into Claude itself now, not Claude Code, but just traditional Claude. And if you've got ChatGPT, Grok, Gemini, Copilot, it doesn't really matter. You can use any of those to help you to create a system prompt for your subagent. So let's have a look at what I've done. Over here on the left, you can see this was the prompt that I gave to Claude, and I said, I need you to create a detailed system prompt for a Claude Code subagent, which will create PRDs when the user needs a product manager's skills to convert a CEO level request into a junior developer level PRD and task list. And you can see Claude has gone away, thought about it, and I did use Opus 4.5, which is their more intelligent model. It's slightly longer, slower, and I did use thinking mode as well. And you can see here it spat out the PRD subagent system prompt. And you can see it's fairly detailed. I was expecting like 2 paragraphs, and it has gone possibly over the top. It's provided, let's just go up to the top and have a look. So it's given us the role, the principles, and then it's given PRD generation process. It's given an example template of how it should look. It's then said task breakdown template. So not only has it generated the PRD, it's then saying you also need to generate a task list using this format, and then the estimation guidelines. Okay, so trivial, half an hour to an hour, small 1 to 2, extra large more than 8 hours. Junior developer readiness checklist, and then response format, and example interaction notes, and then important notes. So that is a highly, highly detailed system prompt. That is quite impressive, I think. And I'm going to use that verbatim for now, just for this example. But if, for example, you know that you always want PRDs saving in a certain folder, directory, and you want task lists, perhaps either saving in the same folder as the PRD, or actually you want all tasks in a different directory, and things like user preference and important notes here, never do this, always do that, prefer this. You might actually think, I don't always want it to ask me if the scope seems too large. I want it to just make that decision for me. And again, coming back up here, you might say that this PRD template is too long. You just want something a lot simpler, and perhaps they can break it down into smaller PRDs. There's so many different ways you can skin this. But for now, just for demonstrating, I'm going to take this and I'm going to choose up here. I've gone up to the MD format, so it's kind of like in the raw format. I'm just going to choose copy, and then I'm going to go back into our Claude Code session, and I'm just going to type /agents. And you can see there it's already come up. And if I hit return, you can see, make it a little larger. You can see here it says no agents found, and we've got the option to create a new agent. And you can then see the built-in ones that are available. So general purpose, status line setup, explore, and plan. And it even tells you which models it's using as well, which is kind of useful to know. Each subagent has its own context window, system prompt, and specific tools. Try creating a code reviewer, code simplifier. And I think eventually we're going to see that all of these exist. And actually they probably exist primarily through skills rather than agents. But let's see what happens there. So I'm going to hit return and press create new agent. And then importantly, we have the choice here. Do we want this to be a project level agent or a personal agent? Now in my head, I don't know why, but personal feels like it's like the smaller of the two, but it's not, right? So personal is saying it's going to be across all projects, and projects is just for this one project. Now I'm going to choose personal. So we're going to do it across all projects. But obviously, if it's something that you want only for this project, then you choose project. Hit return. And then we've got here, create new agent, create your method, create with Claude, recommended. Fine, if you want to do that, it probably goes through a very similar process to what I've just done with Claude Desktop. However, for the demonstrative purposes, I'm going to go through and continue by showing you, let's do manual configuration. Hit return. And then we want a unique identifier for your agent. So I'm going to call this product-manager. And then enter the system prompt. So I've already copied it, so I'm going to paste it here, and then I'm going to hit enter. Now it's asking when should Claude use this agent. So that's a really good point. I'm going to go back to Claude Desktop, and I'm going to actually ask it. So I've just said here, I need to define when Claude Code should use this agent. I expect the prompt should be fairly pithy, stroke succinct. What should I say? And this will now give Claude the opportunity to give a succinct trigger definition. There we go. I'm going to use the slightly longer one. I do slightly prefer talking a bit more than less. I think it gives the clarity. However, if you want to use the simpler one, then you can just copy and paste this one. And let's go ahead and paste it. And then we've got the option of tools here. Do we want to do all tools, read-only tools, edit tools, execution tools, MCP and other tools? I want to choose all tools, and they're already selected, so that's fine. We can go down to advanced options, and we can see here there are extra things. So specifically, do we want only bash or only glob, grep, etc.? If you're not an expert, either choose all tools or read-only tools is a safer option. For me, I don't think actually that the product manager will need most of the tools, but for now, I'm going to keep it open and allow it tools, go up to the top and press continue. And then which agent do I want to use? Now, for this one, because it is in the planning phase, and I really think it's really, really important with AI and vibe coding to focus more time and attention on the planning than it is on the execution. A really good plan executed okay is much better than an average plan executed really well. So I would say spend more time on the planning and then speed up on the doing. So for me, I'm going to go for Opus, and I get to choose a background color. I'm going to go with a nice little purple, and it's confirming now. So we've got product manager, where it's going to save it, the tools that it's allowed to use, the mode that it's going to be in, and then the description and the system prompt, which we're going to press enter or S to save. I'm going to press enter now. And now we can see, if we scroll down, we can see it's now available, and we can view the agent, edit the agent, delete the agent, or go back. And now let's exit out of here. So now we've saved our agent. Let's just have a quick look here. So I want to remind you, I decided I was going to save this at the user level rather than the project level. So if I go into my files, we can see, we'll come down here and you can see Git, which is the current directory that I've been working in my project in, and YouTube demo, which is the name of the project. On a Mac, I've run Command, Shift, and full stop, which then shows me all of the kind of the hidden files and folders. And you can see that we've got a .claude folder. So if we click into .claude, you can see we've just got settings.local.json, and we've also got the CLAUDE.md, which is kind of the instructions for Claude for that project. But what we don't have in here is any agent information. So instead, we want to go back to my home directory, which is this column here, and we can click instead. We'll have to come back here and know Command Shift and full stop again. And now we can see all the extra files have shown up. So we've got Claude.json and a backup there, but importantly, we've got the .claude folder. We go in here, and now we can see indeed we have got the agents folder. And here we go. We can see project manager.md. So let's actually open this up in Cursor and just have a look. You don't need to do this. I just want to show you that it has saved it, and this is what it looks like once it's saved. So as we can see, as I showed you from the Claude documents here, this was the example that I showed you earlier. And now let's have a look at what Claude's created. Yeah, we can see description, model, and color. We haven't got any skills added there yet. That's fine. We'll come on to that in a moment. 3 more dashes, and then we've got the instructions which have been saved, including the example itself. And if we wanted to look at it slightly nicer, we can right click on it and come down to open preview. And now we can see it's slightly more legible and easier to read, and we can understand and we can check all the instructions. We can indeed just come straight into this document and edit it raw if we want to as well. So for example, if we go back into the raw thing, we can see here, we've got model is Opus. If we decided we wanted to change it perhaps to Haiku, we can easily just delete Opus, add Haiku, save it. And the next time the agent runs, it will run with the current agent. Of course, we can edit it down here in the Claude agent as well. I just wanted to show you that's kind of how the file system and structure is working. Now, if we go back to the scenario whereby I was creating my first project, you'll remember that we were creating the Velocity AI landing page. And let's say, for example, what we next want to do is add an AI chatbot. We can use the product manager agent we've just created to help us to do that. So first and foremost, let's get the website back up and running. We've come back, it's a new day, and we are now trying to remind ourselves how we get into the project. But we're not experts in development. What we have got though is AI. So let's ask Claude. All I've said is spin up the front end so we can see the landing page, and I'm going to let Claude figure out the rest itself. It's asking me now if it can run npm run dev. I'm going to say yes. And it says the server is now running in the background. Let's just expand this window a little bit so we can see it better. And there we go, localhost 3000. I've restarted the page, and there we go. We're back to where we were. Now, what I want to do now is, as I said, I'm going to add in a little chatbot. I have no idea how to do this, let's say, and instead I'm going to just figure out, I want to showcase my ability to put a chatbot onto a front-end platform like this, but rather than it being a kind of generic, like very sales-driven AI agent, I want it to be a more helpful agent. I want it to be something that can showcase the two-way conversation, real-time flow, can add some persona to it later, but for now I just want to do this. But let's say I don't know how to do it. Obviously, in your scenario, it could be something completely different. It could be that you want to add login to the front end. It could be that you want to add a database. It could be so many different things to your app and whatever it is that's missing. But I'm just going to do the chatbot because I think it's very visually easy for you to see that AI is working with me collaboratively without me being the expert in this area. So I'm going to explicitly call out now to use the product manager agent. But of course, we don't have to do that. In theory, Claude should be able to figure out when to use the right agents. But for this demonstration, I'm going to make sure that it does. So now I've asked it, using the product manager agent, I want you to create a detailed PRD and for an AI-driven chatbot on our homepage. This should serve two purposes. I then accidentally hit return, so I escaped to stop it, and then I continued by saying it should be able to answer questions on our business and AI optimization in general. 2, it should showcase our ability to install an AI chatbot into the front end of someone's website. Now, obviously, I would highly recommend that you focus on what you're good at and don't try and get AI to get around the fact that you're not very good at something. Obviously, if it's just for delivering what you need for you, absolutely fine. But my strongest recommendation is to be authentic and be genuine at this point. You don't want to pitch and pretend to be something you're not. I'm speaking from a place of experience here. I've seen it from both sides of the fence. I've had people pitch me when they clearly don't know their stuff. And I've also been parts of teams before where we didn't know enough of our information and it was clearly obvious we didn't win the work. And as a result, we wasted our time and our customers' time. So don't do that. Focus on what you are good at, and that will naturally lead to a lot of opportunities. Back to the project, we've got here, make a directory, and it wants to make a new directory called requirements. I'm happy for that, so let's go ahead and do it. And importantly, what we can see now here is that the purple color that I chose earlier, product manager, has now been highlighted, and it's given the task of create chatbot PRD. And it's then said, create a detailed PRD for an AI-driven chatbot to be added to the Velocity AI landing page. And that's it. What this prompt here is come from our agent. So our main agent, if you like, the top level agent, has then passed this as an instruction down to the sub agent. And the sub agent is now working away in the background. And you can see now here, we've got boogieing, it's working away. It says it's been working for a minute or so. And if we wanted to, we could go and have a look in the docs/requirements directory over here. So we can now see it's been created as a directory. So if we click down, at the moment, there's nothing been created in there. So in a moment, hopefully what we should see is that the product manager PRD chatbot will have word away and delivered us something in the background. Again, some points to note here. As hard as the product manager chatbot subagent is working, it is not using any context from our main chat. So in here, what we should see is if we went to /context, it won't work right now because it's working. It's actually proactively doing something. We needed for it to rest. But when it has rested, we can check the context. If we had checked the context before we initiated the agent or the sub-agent, and then we checked it again, we should see is pretty much almost no difference to context. even though this section might be working very, very hard. Whilst that is working away, I'll just show you one other thing which we can see down here. You may have noticed this from the video earlier, but again, I'll just highlight it. So this npm run dev get stroke 200, what this actually is telling us is there is a terminal window essentially in the background which Claude is managing, and we can go and have a look at it. And if we want to have a look at it, we just press the down arrow when we're in the chat agent. So the cursor's here. So just press down and we can see it's now highlighted. Press up again and it goes back to the previous message. Press escape and we clear that out. So now let's press down again, and this time press enter to view the task. And then it shows you background tasks. There's one shell running and it's just this one, but there could be other shells that have run and are finished. In this instance, there haven't been any previous ones. So we can either then go up and down to choose different ones, enter to view, K to kill, and escape to close that window. If you close, it doesn't kill. So just note that if you want to kill it, you need to press K. But let's instead go and enter and to view it. And what we can now see here is actually the page has jumped up here to show us that this shell is showing this page, which is quite cool. I have not seen that happen before. And we can choose don't open or don't show again. I'm just going to close out entirely. But you can now see that the shell is running. This is what's happening. And indeed, we can scroll down. So actually that can save us having to go to a Chrome or another browser like this. We can just stay here and just have it open as a separate side tab. And now we can either kill it, which would then mean that this web page would stop working for now locally, or we can just escape to close out, and I'll leave it in escape. Now it looks like at some point I've pressed escape and that's caused Claude to stop. So let's continue that. These things happen sometimes, but what I'm going to say instead is continue and see whether or not Claude can pick up where it left off. If not, we'll just have to start again and ask the product manager to start again. So it looks like the product manager hadn't finished and Claude has now kicked it off again with the exact same requirement and has now started the product manager. Notice here we don't really get to see a lot of granularity about what's going on inside the product manager subagent, and that is one of the challenges you've got with subagents, is that you kind of have to trust that it's going off, it's doing its thing, and then when it's finished it will come back. So I'm going to let this run and then I'm going to come back. So it took a minute or two for that to complete, but we have now got a PRD and it is fairly detailed. So if I scroll back up, you'll see just how detailed this PRD is. Now, is it any good? That's a completely different question. And I am honestly not going to check through whether this is good or not, because this is just a demonstration. What I would say to you is, as you go through creating whatever you're creating with whatever agents you're instructing, absolutely go through the process of iterating, looking at what it produces. If there's something obvious that it produces that's completely inaccurate, then I would suggest you go back into your agent PRD. I would suggest you go back into your agent.md file. So in this case, the product manager.md, and I'd look through the system prompt here, and then I would update it so that whatever it is that it's done, perhaps that you don't want it to do, you remove the wrong bits, or you advise it correctly up here, don't do this. Or if it's missing something out and you do want it to include it, then obviously add that as an instruction to do. We can see here now doc/requirement/chatbot.prd. So it will come and populate into this directory in a moment once I approve it. So let's go to the bottom, let's approve it for now, say yes. You can see it's now populated here and we can click on it. And we can again use the preview. And let's just minimize this for a moment. And we can see here we've got author as PM subagent, status in draft, executive summary, and we can go through all the information here. And this is where it becomes really, really super important that you as a human do step in. Don't just take what's been created and run with it. If you either don't want to manually update it yourself, at least read through it and then consider what you're not happy with, because AI has produced you something which is probably on average good, but it's not going to be right for your use case. It's not going to be perfect for what you need. So this is the point where you become the CEO of your own company and you need to advise and say, really good first draft, but it's missing this, or this is wrong. Update it and either tell Claude in this chat window down here and say, actually, this is a great first draft. However, this and this needs changing, or just do it one at a time. This needs changing. Okay, that needs changing. Okay, next bit. Until you get the PRD right. Or even ask Claude to have a conversation with you and say, let's go through this PRD now. What do you think of this PRD? Is it actually fit for purpose? Do you have any questions you need me to answer to help make it the best it can possibly be? Now, Claude's just taken about 6 minutes to create another document, and I don't know whether or not this is the agent that's created it or actually the main Claude instance that we're using. I suspect it's actually the main instance that's used this off the back of the PRD. And I can't unfortunately scroll back up because the limit doesn't allow me to keep going back up as far as I can scroll. I can only scroll up to the top here. So it's a very, very long document. We're doing it all in line. So we'll come down to the bottom here. And it says, do you want me to create the breakdown? I'm going to say yes, because we absolutely do. And we can see that it was actually the product manager, which is great. So that's exactly what we wanted to do. So it's created that. And then if we wanted to go into more detail and see, we can do Control O. So let's do that and have a look. And you can see here, it's now written the PRD, then it's written task breakdown, and we can Control O to go back again. And I've just opened up the task breakdown that Claude has just created down here. And I just thought we'd have a quick look at it. So let's see how long it is. Yeah. It's fairly long, right? I mean, that is arguably too long, really. It might be actually better that we break it out. But it's a task breakdown, as it says there, right? So the point is, it's going through Epic 1 and then breaking that down into separate subtasks. So task chat 001, chat 002, until it gets to task chat 008. And then the next thing, it moves on to Epic 2, which is state management. And then it says chat 009. So it continues on the numbering here, but it breaks it down into different requirements. And the time that Claude gives, I've noticed it assigns the time that it would take a traditional developer to do this. So generally speaking, you can probably divide by 10 if you get a good AI flow going. I've just scrolled down to the bottom and the last epic is 6. So it's broken it into 6 big chunks, documentation and deployment. And then it's given task 30, which is to write the user documentation, create an admin dashboard, and to set up monitoring before we then deploy. And we can see down here in the summary that it's given a phased breakdown. So week 1 is foundation UI, week 2 is API and business logic, week 3 is testing and development. And this is what I would describe as a kind of a very traditional developer path, which is what Claude is used to using. Claude hasn't yet figured out that it itself can do things a lot faster. And so the reality is week 1 is probably like day 1, and week 2 might be day 2, and week 3 might be day 3. You might even be able to do it faster than that if you can run it overnight, for example. And you can see here that's the critical path is 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5. And risk mitigation here, start with hard-coded responses as fallback. Fine. And do you know what? That looks good. Now let's see what Claude has said. So Claude is now saying the product manager agent has completed. Good. And here's what we now have. We've got 1 and 2, which we've just had a look at. That's true. Key highlights the purpose, answers questions about velocity, live demonstration of chatbot capabilities. And then tech recommendation, OpenAI GPT-4o Mini, which is pretty good, actually. I would agree on that. React TypeScript, fine. Timeline 2 to 3 weeks, MVP approach, start with hard-coded responses, and then add AI intelligence. Great. So what would you like me to do? Start building the chatbot, review the PRD files, walk through specific sections. I'm just going to say start building it because I literally just want to show you this as quickly as possible, and I'm not too worried about it being right at this point. So I'm going to hit 1, and then I'm going to go and grab a coffee. I'm going to come back once it's run. Now, interestingly, in Claude Code, we've got this screen here where we can see that it started to make a directory. Fine. It then wants to do some writing. It wants to create some documents, and we absolutely want to let it do this. So I'm going to change now, and I'm going to hold Shift and press Tab, which is then going to allow all edits during this session. Now, again, like everything, it's about your personal risk tolerance. For me, I'm creating something brand new. I'm not editing something that already exists or that already is actually in working status. So I'm not worried about Claude like breaking anything at this point. So I'm going to hold Shift and press Tab. And now that should allow it to run all the time. In Gemini, it actually has something called YOLO mode. You only live once. That's really powerful, particularly for like set and forget. You just want Gemini to go away and absolutely run something entirely. And, you know, something like this, MVP, where you really don't care. You just want it to bring up the first 80% and then you want to edit it later. My feeling is there's kind of a middle ground on all of this, like there generally is with most things, which is that I think you should first and foremost focus on a really detailed PRD, a detailed spec, get it as close to what you actually are looking for whilst you ideate, design, architect, and then throw it at the AI, really clear instructions, and just let it run through the whole thing. And then once you've done that, then iterate, review it, and check. That for me has worked best, but some other people might say, no, actually don't worry about the detailed stuff first, just throw up something and then tweak it as you go. I would say that the longest process with all of AI generated coding, vibe coding, whatever you want to call it, is fixing problems that AI hasn't realized that it's created something at the back end, something at the front end, and it's assumed different things for both sides. And we can see now that Claude is working away in the background. And again, I'm just going to leave it and let it crack on with all these different tasks. And once it's done that, I'll come back. We're now sort of just over halfway through, and I just thought it was a good opportunity to show you that you can see that Claude is working through its task list and it's starting to strike out those that it's completed. And then obviously it's just jumped into thinking about something else now. So it's hidden the task list for a moment, but the task list will come back again. Great. Okay. So Claude is now finished and it's saying here, excellent. The AI chatbot is now live on the landing page and what it's built, and it explains what it's built there. And so it says it's taking 12 hours to do, or 24 hours, or whatever it was that the original PRD said. Claude has just done that in about 3 minutes. I'm not suggesting it's to the level that you could deploy it for production. We can already see over here on the right hand side in the preview that the chat widget is there. Let's go into the main Chrome page and have a look now. And yeah, we can see that it's down here. So let's just click on it and try chat with us. Now I'd be amazed if this works because I haven't given it an API key yet, but slightly dodgy fonts here. They're very gray, very hard to read. So you might want to ask a quick question, you might want to type your message, but let's just see what services do you offer. Let's click it, and there you go. We've actually got a hard-coded response. So hard-coded responses are working, which is interesting, and it's also hidden the other questions there. Now, I'm just going to test this one now. Test comment. So you can't really read that. It's very hard to read, so that's the first thing I would go back with and say, and iterate this is to say, can't really read the grey. Press send, and there you go. It's giving us the auto response when it doesn't have a right answer. So we've got this shell. We obviously need to plumb everything together, get it all working properly. This tutorial is primarily about Claude Code itself and not about actually building out something like a website, but there are plenty of videos on YouTube where you absolutely can find that information. So if you are looking to do that, then I'd suggest continuing on one of those. But going back to Claude and its features, I think we've now sufficiently demonstrated how the agent process works. So to recap, we've now covered the delegation, the who around our agents. Okay, so we've created a sub-agent. We know why we're going to use them and how to start them. We know what's included in them and the fact that they can be built in or custom, and that we can choose to make them by project or by user, and that project takes precedent. Just briefly talking about chaining them, the concept is fairly simple. So in the example I've just run through there, we created a PRD and a task list using the product manager subagent. We could have created a second subagent, and perhaps that would be called quality assurance or question generate reviewer, or another agent, which we could then say first use the product manager agent, then use the quality assurance or question generator subagent. Might perhaps be an agent which explicitly goes through a document and identifies questions for me as the user stroke CEO, whatever you want to call that persona, to answer, and that we can then work through together. So what you could actually do is say to Claude, first of all, go and create the PRD, create the task list, then create a load of questions. Or you could do it the other way around, right? Create a load of questions first, pass those questions to another agent to flesh out or to answer. So you can essentially chain them, do one, then the other, and you can pass the information from the first one into the second one so that then you can get a knock-on effect. There are probably some much better examples of how to chain, but those are two simple examples I can give you now. And as I mentioned already, the plugins themselves is essentially just a sub-agent that you've created that you zip together and you can send to your friends. And what we can do back in Claude here is we can actually do /plugin, because not only can we create plugins, but other people can create them. There is also a plugin marketplace now. So if we do /plugin, we can see here that we've got the marketplace, and we can either browse and install, manage and uninstall, add a marketplace, or manage marketplaces. Now I haven't added any yet, so we could add one if we knew that there was a specific marketplace or somebody's marketplace that we wanted to add. For now, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go to browse and install. And what we can now see here is we've got a list of all of the different plugins that we've got available to us. We've got TypeScript, Pyrite, Swift, Hookify. There are an awful lot. We've got Atlassian, Figma, Asana, Notion, GitLab, Vercel, Stripe. Many of these will be very familiar to a lot of developers who are already using these. If you aren't using these already, I would suggest for now, don't worry about them, but just know that there is a marketplace and that you can add additional marketplaces, which are essentially like repositories for apps that you can then go and add specific plugins. And if you want more information, of course, we can use the down arrow. So let's say we scroll down to Slack here and pressed enter. We can have a look at the Slack. So Slack workplace integration, search messages, access channels, read threads, and stay connected with your team's communications while coding. Find relevant discussions and context quickly. So that could be really useful if you've got, for example, a Slack channel where you've got customers giving you feedback saying, I'm not very happy with this, I need this improving. You could actually have an agent that would automatically grab those comments, create PRDs, and then send them to an agent to identify and potentially problem solve, create bugs, create actions that then need your team to review, like for example, tickets. that you could then review and decide whether or not it actually was a genuine problem, whether it was that user's issue or whether it's a system-wide problem. So there are a ton of different features that you can use here. I'm not going to install this because I don't want to use it, but you can see we just click install now and we'll be able to do that. Back to plugin list, I'm going to escape back and escape back again, and we're back to our chat. So far we've covered the who, which is the agent. Next up, we've got the what. So the tools, i.e. the sword, the staff, or the flip chart that we're going to give AI to use, and we can choose how to do that. Now, as I said, tools are the what, and tools are broadly broken down into two sections: commands that the command line interface would use. So if you were a developer, or if you were someone who's very au fait with computers, you might have used the command line before. You can use to run scripts, things like Bash or Python. You can use it to run database queries for things like SQL. And all of those are now available as tools, and you can explicitly allow, deny, or ask for each of those tools. And similarly, we've got MCP servers. Now, think of MCP servers as, again, as a tool and as a way that, rather than using the command line, that your agent has got the ability to immediately go and access things like Canva, Monday.com, like it database, and like Stripe. And it can do a number of different things, a bit like an API, if you're familiar with APIs. It can go and ask questions. So, for example, on Stripe, it might be able to do things like generate you your payment report so you can understand how you've been paid already. But it might also be able to do things like create you a new subscription for a new member or send out an invoice, things like that. Similarly, with Canva, you might be able to generate a document based on all the information you've given it, or you might be able to go into Canva and get information about files, about what exists, about file names, possibly even the images, and download images and PDFs straight from Canva to your project that you can then use perhaps on your website. Taking commands first, I just want to show you that we don't actually have a /tools element here, but what we do have is /permissions, which is the allowed tools. And I just want to show you that this process works here. So you can see we've got allow, ask, deny, and workspace in the permission section. So Claude Code won't ask before using the allow tools. And we can add a new rule here, or we can edit the rules that already exist. Now, for example, I've included npm install is an allowed permission. So I'm happy that Claude can always do npm install. I'm very happy for Claude to do that at this project level. And we can go down here, press enter, and we can then choose to delete it. I'm going to say no, or we can add a new rule, and I can then give it instructions. We can then tab across and we can say, we always want you to ask before doing certain things. So for example, it might be always ask before pushing our code into the cloud. That would be quite a good rule to have, because sometimes Claude can get a little bit carried away. And if you have got scripts set up in your cloud, which is, for example, if we push to our primary, our main repository in the cloud in GitHub, then it might trigger a new deployment on your live server. And that could be a problem if your customers are actually accessing that product and you haven't checked that the code is correct. So you can add all kinds of rules there, whatever works for you. Deny, so you explicitly never want Claude to be allowed to do this. So if it tries to do it, it goes, I can't do that, you're going to have to do it. That could be something that could be detrimental, like, for example, messing around with a database with a write key. So you might be able to give it a different API key. So one key is just read only, which you want AI to do, and one is a read and write, which perhaps only you want to be allowed to do. And then finally, the workspace. This is quite a useful one, because what you can do here is, obviously we've got our current project that we're working in, the git/YouTube demo repository. But what we can also do is add in another directory. So for example, if we wanted to give it access to our downloads folder on our computer, or to a different project altogether, or there are perhaps images or other files that we need to access as part of this project, we can add a directory, which then means that Claude can automatically get permission to go and check those files. By default, they'll be read, but if you have turned on the auto accept edits, then it will be able to edit any files in that folder too. We can also edit the agents and what the tools are allowed for each of the agents by using the /agents command again. And we can see here, we can go into the one we've already created here, the product manager one, pressing return, and then we can edit the agent and we can choose to edit the tools here. So if we click in, we can then see we've got all tools, read only, edit tools, execution tools, MCP tools, and other tools, or show advanced options. Now what I'm going to do for a moment is I'm going to take off all tools and I'm just going to add the read only tools, because what I also want to show you is up here, we've opened up the product manager.md file, and you can see we've got name, description, model, and color, but there are no tools there. Now, the reason for that is that we've already included all tools, so we don't need to have an explicit list. It assumes and inherits all tools unless you explicitly tell it otherwise. But now, for the sake of example, I'm going to say we just want this PRD agent to be able to read only. So I'm going to click that one and then choose continue at the top. And immediately you can see we've just updated, and now the tools that it can use are glob, grep, read, web fetch, to do write, web search, bash output, and kill shell. And in fact, we could even remove those manually if we wanted to take any of those out. But let's go back again now, edit the agent, and instead edit the tools again. And this time we're going to choose all tools and continue. What I've just done now is deleted the tools line from this document here, and just to show you that we can edit it this way instead. And if we now go back into Product Manager and we go to Edit Agent and we choose Edit Tools, we should be able to see that everything is selected. It does actually only say that 4 of them are, but actually it has actually inherited all tools. I'm not really sure why. If I choose that, continue, that should have now updated it entirely. And now you can see we are back to having all of the agent tools available to us again. Next, we've got MCP servers. Now, I've talked you through what MCP servers are, but I think what I want to also mention here is that MCP servers can bloat an agent quite a lot. So essentially an agent needs to understand when to use the MCP, and it needs all the information about each MCP all in one go. So my recommendation is that you actually try to reduce the number of MCPs that you have in your primary agent, and rather you use skills and get the main agent to call a skill as and when it needs to use that skill, and then that skill will use the MCP server. For example, if you wanted to do some database analysis, you would create a skill, which we're going to go on to in the next section. That skill would then be a database analyst. It would have the tool of being able to review the database, and it would have the MCP of actually accessing, for example, Supabase or another database. This then allows for a separate subagent to have the context of the MCP, how to use it and how it works, but rather the main agent just knows, okay, I've got somebody that can go and look at the database. Think of this a little bit like a CEO. Rather than teaching the CEO how to read a spreadsheet and how to use your financial software, your CEO has an accountant, and the accountant knows how to do that, and the accountant's head is full of that technical information and understanding of how to use the systems and operate it. And then the accountant can report back to the CEO and give the CEO just the information the CEO actually needs. But having said that, if we go into our Claude terminal again and we type /MCP, we can see here we've got the opportunity to manage MCP servers. And you can see rightly we've got no MCP servers configured as yet. So how do we add MCP servers? Well, it's actually very, very simple for Claude Code. There are 2 ways to do this. One of them is from the command line here. It's my strong preference. And the other option is to add it via the documentation. I'll show you both ways. So first of all, we can come into the Claude Code docs, and it's as simple as Googling Claude Code MCP add, and you'll get this very long list of different MCPs that you can add and how to do it. Let's first of all start with Google Drive because it's nice and easy to do. So here we can see Google Drive command. To add an MCP server, rather than being in the Claude Code prompt area, what we actually want to be is back on the terminal itself. So you'll notice now we've come out of Claude and we're just back to the actual terminal line. So now I've pasted the code in here, hit return, and you can now see that it says it's added HTTP MCP server with the URL to local config. Note that it's local config, not project config, okay? So we can see where it is. It's in users YouTube demo /.claude.json. So let's go and have a look at that file now. So now I've opened claude.json, and this is actually a very, very big file. And it's basically the settings for Claude Code itself. And you can see there's lots of different information here. But what I'm going to do is scroll down. And as you can now see, I've brought up the section which shows that we are in the users YouTube demo git YouTube demo section. And you can see here we've got allowed tools is none, MCP context URIs is none. But crucially, the MCP servers here, we're seeing Google Drive, type is HTTP, and the URL is the correct URL that we've just added. So that is literally how we go about adding an MCP server. So you can do it manually if you want to, but obviously it's really nice and easy. So now if we jump back into Claude again, unfortunately my recording just failed on me. So what I'm going to do is talk you through what I've just done so that you can see and understand how it's worked. The first thing we did was just come in here and pressed /MCP, and we checked that the Google Drive had been enabled. That was after purposefully disabling it. and you just go through the simple Google authorization login flow as you would do for any type of Google authentication or permission. And the next thing we wanted to do was then see what it can do. So we asked, hey, what can we do with Google Drive MCP? And of course it gave us the answer. We can search and find files, we can read and download, we can upload files, and then there's some of the common use cases. So the first question I asked it was to count how many files are in the main directory of my Google Drive, because I didn't really want to share all the file contents of what I've got in my Google Drive because I've connected it to my real actual Google Drive. And you can see here it's then found that I've got 109 files in the root directory, which is probably quite disorganized and probably needs a bit of organizing, but that's a job for another day. And then I asked it, find in the Google Drive Claude Code file, what is the meaning of life? And I actually forgot to tell it to use the MCP here. So first of all, it did a quick search. And then the next question I asked it was to check in the file Google Drive Claude Code MCP what the meaning of life is. And I actually forgot to tell it to use the MCP here. I was in a little bit of a rush and I didn't realize that I hadn't mentioned that. So first of all, it looked in the local drive here, and obviously it couldn't find the document I was referring to. And then it realized that it couldn't, and then wondered if it could be in Google Drive. And obviously it's then gone away and it's had a look for it. It's found it. It's found the information. It's given me the file's actual unique code. And then it's had a look inside the file and it says, according to your Google Drive document, the meaning of life is, and then it's quoted the exact sentence that I've added to that file. The secret to life is good coffee. Sounds like solid wisdom to me. So there you go. So it's able to search through files, find file names, find the information in the files. So the final thing on tools I want to cover before we move on to the skills themselves, which I think is a really powerful part of Claude Code now, the custom / commands. I'm just going to give you a really silly example, but I just want you to understand how to create / commands, what can potentially do with them, and then leave it really to you to go away and test out the full power of them. And obviously, as you develop your own experience of using / commands, there are different values for what you can do for these commands. So let's jump back into Claude now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new directory, a new folder called commands inside the home directory .claude folder. So using Mac or Linux, and Windows is very similar, you've got the kind of the home directory, which looks like this. And then inside the home directory, you've got kind of the user level .claude. And this is where we want to add our folder, and the folder is going to be called commands. So it's going to look like this here. Now, rather than going into how we can do this either in command line, if you know how to do it, make directory, mkdir, and then you can go in through and do it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Claude to do it and assume that I actually don't know how to do this, even though I do. So I'm going to say to it, we need to make a commands folder inside .claude in the user directory. Do that now. And you can see here, it's actually doing exactly what we want. So users, YouTube demo, that's my account, .claude / commands, and that's exactly right. So let's do that, yes. And now Claude is just checking that inside .claude, we have got the commands directory, which we have. And good, it says it's now created the commands folder. And indeed, the directory is now ready for you to add custom / commands. So let's go ahead and create one. Now we're still in cursor here. So what I'm actually going to do is just click it in the window above here. And I'm going to click Command N for a new file. You can come up to the top of the menu as well and choose new file there. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a custom / command in an empty file here. I'm just going to say, tell a joke about, and I'm going to use the arguments variable, which is going to be dots. This should be light-hearted and funny. I'm going to literally leave it as that just to demonstrate this. Now when we need to save it, we need to save it as the /command name .md, and we need to save it in the new folder we've just created. So if I do Command S to save, now if I open up my file browser here, we need to Command Shift full stop so we can see our hidden files again. We've got .claude, we've got the new directory commands, and I'm going to call this joke.md. Now, just to be safe, I'm going to exit Claude and I'm going to come back into Claude again to continue the session so that it's reloaded any of the commands. And now I'm going to do /joke, and you can see joke is indeed there. And I'm going to say about Santa. And let's see what happens. So joke is running. And what Santa should do is after the /joke, it allows us to add tell a joke about, and then Santa goes in there. So tell a joke about Santa. This should be lighthearted and funny. And here we go. Why doesn't Santa ever get parking tickets at the North Pole? Because his sleigh is always on the house. Plus the elves control the meter maids. Obviously, that's an example of just doing a joke, but you see the point I'm making there. Obviously, we're not using Claude Code to generate funny jokes, although maybe that's part of your process. I don't know. But you can absolutely use this for repetitive commands. You can then give this / command to one of your subagents. You can use it as tool calls. So there's a huge amount of versatility and value in creating those / commands, and that's the final part of the tools. So far we've covered the who, with being the agents, and the what of all the different tools. Now we are focused on the skills, and that is the kind of the injectable brain part of each of our different agents. And tools is by far the most comprehensive part of Claude Code. It's the newest part of Claude Code as well, and it is in some respects the most difficult to get your head around. However, once you have understood it, that's where the real value, I think, lies. I did see a video recently which described skills as kind of the software layer, and if you think of Cursor or anti-gravity as the operating system level, and then you've got Claude or OpenAI as the kind of CPU layer of your traditional tech stack. As I said already, skills is the expertise. It's the how we're going to do these skills, how we are going to do the work that we need to do. And if we come on over here, the why is that it teaches Claude how to do something specific. And I have added these little boxes over here to talk about the difference between, for example, skills and subagents, because it's slightly counterintuitive. Why would I use one and not the other? Hopefully my diagram before has kind of explained that, but the way that Claude themselves explain it, or Anthropic, is that they say skills add knowledge to the current conversation. Subagents run in a separate context with their own tools. Use skills for guidance and standards. Use subagents when you need isolation or different tool access. And I think it's worth noting here that you can use a subagent with a skill, so you can actually have both. So you can have isolation or different tool access with the addition of the extra knowledge to the conversation for that subagent, and it allows you to keep the context freer. And I'm going to come on to context later, but that's the example of skills versus subagents. And then skills versus MCP is skills tell Claude how to use tools, MCPs provide the tools themselves. And I think that's fairly intuitive. For example, an MCP server connects to Claude to your database, while a skill teaches Claude your database model, your query patterns, perhaps your schema, and any other things that Claude needs to understand. So what is Claude? I'm going to jump up to a diagram above in a moment to kind of show how it's laid out. But in essence, skill is very simply a set of documents, a set of files. And for example, if we've got in here called my skill, the directory would be called my skill, and the directory would sit, depending again whether you wanted it at the user level or at the project level, and you would have it in the home folder /.claude/skills. So if we don't have the skills directory, we need to create it. Or at the project level, we do .claude. So again, it would be in the project folder, and then .claude / and a new directory skills again. We then create a directory called whatever we wanted to call the skill, my skill, for example. And then within this directory, we then start to populate the documentation for this specific skill. So for example, if we had one for brand guidelines, one for HR, and one for finance, we would first of all create this skills folder, which would house all three. We would then have one directory which would be called brand guidelines. We'd have one directory called HR, and we'd have one directory called finance. And then within each of those directories, we would then have a skill.md for each. So we'd have a skill.md for brand guidelines, one for HR, and one for finance sitting in the respective directories. And then we'd have any of the other files that we might need later. To help tease this out a little bit further, I've kind of used the example of my own directory and how I've got things set up. So we've got my home directory here, and where we've got a .claude, so this is at the user level, and we could have a skills folder here, which we've got, and then we've also got my project folder, so I've called it Git, and then we've got project 1 and then project 2, and then within project 2, which is what we're working in today, we've got a .claude folder again with all of the usual Claude files and folders we've already talked about. And then we've got this new skills folder here. And within this folder here, I've just changed it. We've got your skill name. So that is going to be the skill that I've called it. So in this case, my skill is called your skill name. And that's what I've put into the file, which we'll come on to in a moment. And within this directory, so one directory here. And so we've got the directory here called your skills name. And that now matches up with the file here. And within this directory, so we've got one skill, so this could be HR, this could be finance, etc. And then we'd have another directory, which would again link back into skills. But within the first skills that we've created, we've got at least one file, which is called skill.md. And this is the reference file for that skill. And within that file, we need to have a couple of basic things. The most important things we need to have is the name of the skill and the description, because this is what is loaded from Claude on loading up your Claude Code for the first time that day, or since you've created this skill. So Claude will literally know there is a skill called this name and it does this thing, and that's all it will know. When you load it up, it will know this is the skill name and this is what it does, and it will understand this information here from the YAML data. And this is what's called level 1 disclosure. So unlike a subagent, where a subagent has completely separate context, all we know is that we've got this agent and then we let the agent go and it disappears off and continues. Skills is slightly different. Skills allows us to say, okay, we've got this expert in HR and finance, whatever, and we know what they do, but we don't know how they do it. We don't really care at this point how they do it, but we just know that they do it. And then what we've got down here below the 3 dashes again is this is kind of like the system prompt and all the background information for this skill. So let's say this was finance, then you might be talking about, your end of year, how your finance is derived, or what your usual protocols, access to certain things. So for example, up here within the allowed tools, you might have added the allowed to access your database, or perhaps it can access an agent to go and do your database for you, various different options. But primarily this here is system prompt is only referenced into the original Claude Code session that you're using, into the context, when Claude has decided, or when you've told Claude to go and use this skill. So it's not clogging up your context, whereas MCPs, immediately on loading an MCP into your Claude Code for the day, it's immediately taking up context space, reducing the short-term memory that Claude has got to operate. Skills don't do that. Skills only take up the description and the name section. If Claude's decided, okay, we're going to use this skill, then we will then load all of this second disclosure information. And what we can also do, and this is where skills really come into their own, is we can offload a lot of the granular detail into separate documents. So if this skill recognizes it needs to know about, for example, corporation tax today, but it doesn't need to know about value-added tax or about sales tax or whichever tax it is that it doesn't need to understand, you can break down the documents to talk about whatever it does need to talk about. For example, here I've just said see examples.md, and we can create a separate document, examples.md, which will only load the right information at the right time. Again, this stops the context window from being bloated and having to load everything. So think, for example, you could load up API documentation and you could go into granular detail, documenting all the detail for how to use an API, and you could have that skill in Claude. And Claude could go into here when it needs to understand an API endpoint, but rather than getting every single API endpoint loaded up at once, it can understand the general concept of the APIs first, and then it can look at the documentation for a specific API endpoint, pull that information only, and then continue. Or conversely, we can actually trigger this with a subagent. So we can ask a subagent and we can give the subagent the skill, for example, the finance skill, if we want a subagent to go away, operate, come up with a solution, and then bring it back into the main context window. So we can really start to compound the value of subagents, skills, and tools together. And the final thing that skills also have within its golf bag is the ability to run scripts. Now, this can be very, very powerful because you can create scripts, or you can ask Claude to create scripts, which it runs and runs more than once. This reduces the variability which is inherent within AI. So if you've asked Claude to create you a script, it does a really good job and that's exactly the right script. But next time around, it creates a slightly different script, slightly different output. It might actually have tried to ideate. It might have got the variable names wrong. It might have done all sorts of things. If you have got Claude to create you a good script, you can save this script into the script for this specific skill. And then this skill will always use that script in future. A thing to note about scripts also is that the scripts are the third layer of context. And the thing to additionally understand about scripts is that scripts by themselves, the actual script, the actual text within a script file, does not load into the context of the agent that's running the skill. We only get the output. So if, for example, it's a very complicated set of code and it runs a really complicated process, we don't need to know what the process is. All we want to know is what the output from that script is. It could be yes, it could be no, it could be 23, whatever it is. All we get is the answer, the result of the script. Now, of course, if the script doesn't give a result, if it just runs and that's it done, we probably need to update our script so that it does give us some indication of success or failure or whatever we want to know. But that's about how you code and how you work with Claude to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is back in Claude, I'm going to have a conversation with Claude. I'm going to get Claude to do all the heavy lifting again. And this time I'm going to ask it to create a skills directory. Again, I'm going to do it at the user level rather than the project level. But if you wanted to, you could just create it in this project folder. And just before we actually jump in and actually run that command, I just wanted to show you here that at the moment we haven't got a skills directory yet. So we are in .claude. And we can see the commands that's been created. There's the joke command, but we haven't got a skills. So I'm going to ask Claude now, create a skills directory within, again, tilde/.claude/, and we've now got the new skills directory ready to add a custom skill. For the sake of this example, we're going to create a skill that will explain what code does for us. So let's ask Claude now to create a new directory called explaining code. So now I've said, now create a directory inside the skills directory called explaining code. Now, I just want to note here that you need to create your skill names with only hyphens and no spaces. I tend to use lower caps. I'm not sure if that matters, but I tend to do it in this format here. So we'll just ask Claude to do that. Great, that's been done. And now I'm going to say, finally, create a skills.md file inside the explaining-code directory. Make it with the initial YAML information we need too. And just to remind you, this here is the initial YAML information. So I'm hoping that it's going to do name, space, and then it's going to call it explain code. And then maybe give it a brief description and guess what we need it to be. It's not that difficult to guess. It'll probably leave most of these blank, so may not even have them actually populated, which is fine. Most of these are optional and we can add later if we want to. So here you go, you can see it's already started to create it. Name, explaining code, description, explain code in simple, clear language for non-technical users, version 1.0.0. Author is YouTube demo, and it's given us some tags. And then explanation skill. You are an expert explaining code in simple, accessible language and the task, and it's already created a basic skill for us. So let's go ahead and use that, that's fine. Obviously, if you wanted to update it, you could accept it and then edit it later, but for me, for now, I think that's absolutely fine. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to exit Claude, and then I'm going to reopen Claude again, same chat, but it should now bring in the skill. If we look in the files directory now, we should be able to see in .claude, we scroll down, we can now see the skills directory has been created, which is good. Explaining code is there, which is our first skill, and the skills file itself is here. So let's just open that and have a look. And indeed, just as we saw before, that is the file now created. So what we can now do is actually use this skill and we can test it out. So if I said to Claude, I want you to explain, in fact, let's keep it really simple. I'm just going to say to Claude, use the explain code skill to talk me through, and I'm going to the file at global.css, and I'm just going to hit return, see what happens. I'm going to make it slightly larger just so we can see. Looks like that didn't work, so I'm going to hit return again. There we go, it's now worked, and you can see it's red app/global.css and unknown skill explaining code. So interestingly, it's saying that there's an error there. It doesn't know about the skill, but it does know about the skill because it's obviously found explaining -code, which is kind of interesting. I just realized, but I've updated it, that I actually was not clear enough in my explanation. I needed to have asked for a skill.md, not skills with an S on the end. The directory needs to be skills with the S on the end. The file needs to be skill without the S on the end. Otherwise, it won't work. So I've just reloaded this conversation back up again now, and I'm going to ask it, and now there you go, it can indeed access this skill, and we should be able to say /explain. So interestingly here, Claude above has just said that we should be able to invoke the skill by using a / command skill and then explaining code. You can't do that, so I'm not really sure why Claude's hallucinated that. However, what we can do instead is just tell Claude to use it. So using the explain code skill, tell me about globals.css, and let's see what it says. So now you can see it's reading the file first to understand the file. It's probably going to pass that file through to the skill, and then it's now asking, can we use the skill? Now I can again choose for this skill, I can choose yes this one time, I can choose yes and always allow explaining code in this repo, or I can choose no and don't allow it. So I'm just going to say yes for this one time, don't plan on using it again anyway. And the explaining code skill is running. So what it's now doing is it's loading the system prompt within that skill.md file. If it needed to, it could then go and pull other stuff, and it could even run a script. So it could run, for example, explainer.py, which could format something, change it, pass it somewhere else, whatever. We could do an awful lot of different things, but you get the point here. And using the explaining code skill, we can now see we've got the explaining app/globals.css and the overview of what it does, how it works, and plain English summary. And that really is kind of skills in a nutshell. The final piece of the puzzle with skills is that we have actually got a skills marketplace. If we go over to GitHub, you'll see here we're actually at Anthropic/skills, and what Anthropic have created is a demo set of skills. So we just scroll down the page here, and what you can see is that we can go to plugins, the marketplace, and we can add Anthropic skills. So let's copy that line, return to our Claude Code session, paste it, and hit return. And you can see here that basically all it's doing is cloning the repository into the right directory for Claude Code. So it has essentially taken these files here and saved them to our computer in the right area so that Claude can see them. So now, for example, if we go back into plugins, we can have a look and see manage and install plugins. We can manage marketplaces, and you can see we've got the official plugins, and then we've got the Anthropic agent skills, which is great. If we now go to plugins, we can then look and we can browse and install plugins, and we'll go to the Anthropic agent skills, and we can have a look, and we can see we've got document skills or example skills. So let's go to document skills, and here we can see collection of document processing suite, including Excel, Word, PowerPoint, and PDF. Now, I think these are the skills that actually are included if you're using the desktop version of Claude. These are the skills that the desktop version already has pre-built in. So let's add these in now, and now it's added, so we'll exit. And for the sake of argument, let's just have a quick look and see if we can see it in our directory. So it hasn't installed it here to the user directory. So instead, let's go back, let's go to Git, to YouTube demo, and let's see if we can Command Shift full stop. We can then find the Claude hidden. And you can see here that they're not actually installed in the main skills repository into the directory, but what they've done instead is, because it's a plugin, in the plugins folder here, we click on plugins, we can see the marketplaces, go to marketplaces, and then we want the Anthropic agent skills, and we can then see we've got the skills directory here, and you can see these are all of the different skills that have already been installed. So for example, we could look at the skill creator. Let's have a look at this. And then you can see the license, the reference, the script, and the skill itself. So let's actually open the skill file and let's have a read of what Anthropic has created for us. So you'll see here it says name is skill creator, description, it's a guide for creating effective skills. So this is even easier now. So we've now installed this. Now, future skills that we want to create, we can just use this skill to create future skills, right? So really, really helpful, a tool that builds the tools. It then tells us about skills, it tells us what skills provide, the core principles, and provides all the information we need, the YAML formatter, etc., and massively comprehensive document there. It's 356 lines just to create a new skill. And I think this is the way that things are going to go. We've even got scripts here, which I think will be interesting to have a look at. So you've got init, package it, and then quick validate. And references, you can see here we've got output patterns and we've got workflows. So they've gone into quite a lot of detail here. Sequential workflows for complex tasks, break operations into clear sequential steps. So again, this is really, really powerful. Let's go back into Claude now and see if we can now use that skill. So I'm going to say, let's use the skill creation skill to create a new skill for, let's say, for debugging. So now you can see here it says use the skill creator. Yes, we do indeed want to do that. So click yes. So now it's reading all of this information from this MD file here, all these 400 lines or nearly, and it's putting it into the context of this chat window. And it said, let's create a debugging skill. I'll follow the skill creation process step by step. And now it's going into following the process that we've created from that skill. So Claude might have done it a completely different way, but it's not going to do that because it's going to always use the skill. So it's essentially the SOP, the standard operating procedure. It's the way in which you always want things to be done. And if there are things that you already think, oh, Claude, why can't you just do it the same way every time? That is an exact use case for creating skills. And I think one of the really good ideas for creating skills might be to have a skill that identifies from your chat history things that need to be skills. So almost like a skill finder or a skill ideator. And I think that will come in quite quickly. And I think you'll start to see that will automate. Next up, we've got hooks. And this really is kind of the final piece of the Claude Code puzzle. Everything else beyond this is talking about how to implement and use Claude Code. This is the final part of Claude that I think is really worth understanding. So what are hooks? They're kind of like an auto command that will happen at certain points, and we're going to come on to that in a moment. But auto commands could be things like notifications, so you want Claude to notify you, and it doesn't just have to be an in-screen or a sound. It could be to trigger a webhook, so you could be firing off to various different apps apps. You could actually get a notification to your mobile phone. You can tell other apps, other systems via API. You can do all kinds of clever things, but essentially a notification. You're probably going to want something fairly simple, and I would always recommend the most simple thing you can do. If that works, just do that. Next is something like auto formatting. So as you're coding, as you start to build up, and perhaps you've already got a lot of experience with this, but for those that haven't, you can automatically format lots of different code to make sure that it stays consistent with how you code, how you format, and how your app expects your code to look. Claude, because it's not deterministic, may create one bit of code perfectly, the next bit of code it kind of works in and of itself, but it might not work for your app properly, or it might cause glitches. So you can add in a thing which is like, once Claude's made a bit of code, then automatically trigger the auto formatter and make sure that the code is exactly how it needs to be per your requirements. You can run feedback to Claude Code, so you can almost give it like a feedback loop to say, when that's finished, take that information and feed it back in. Or you can do it for something like logging. So this might be more of an enterprise setup, but your organization might require that if you're using Claude, or you want to be able to review later on, you want to be able to look back and see, well, what code did Claude run? What operations did it run? What scripts did it run? And you can log all of that detail in various different ways, as we'll go through in a bit. So next up, when can we use Claude? And what I mean by when is, what are the time triggers that we can use? And I'll just go over them here before we jump into Claude and have a look properly. And you can see here that I've got session use. So basically when you start a session or when you end a session, so literally when you type Claude for the first time, before even Claude runs properly, it's kind of like a trigger going off. So for example, like if you wanted to be really guarded over your Claude tokens and you knew that other people were using your computer for some reason and you thought they might be using your Claude code, you could potentially cause a hook to auto tell your mobile phone, hey, someone's just started a new Claude session. And the same thing with ending. You could actually get notification to say someone has just finished a Claude session if it's not you. Obviously, you could do lots of other things too, right? You could wait until you finish a Claude session and then you could trigger the auto formatter at the point when you finish your whole session. Wouldn't recommend that. I'd suggest you do it much more frequently, but I'm just giving examples. When a prompt is submitted, so obviously as you've been working through, every time you type a message, hit enter. Before Claude receives that actual message, there's kind of like a gap in there. And what will then happen is that the hook would then trigger on a notification. So if Claude actually provides you with a notification, then it will also trigger a hook. So you could almost like multiply out the notification. So it doesn't just provide Claude's notification to you where it is, it could also emulate it elsewhere, or you could log that notification so you've got a log of all the notifications. Pre-compact, and I think this one has a lot of legs. I think there is a lot of value here in the pre-compact option. Now, just to remind you, in case you're not familiar with compact, earlier in the video we went over this concept, but Claude has a certain amount of short-term memory and it fills up as the conversation continues. The more it does, the more documents it has to read, it fills up, and generally speaking, it gets to about the last 20% of its memory, of its local context, and then it will do what's called compacting, which is where it does kind of like a fairly clever review of the information that it has read through over the last conversation context window, and it will decide what's important, and it will try and create a small document to then start the new window. And basically what then happens is it keeps a few bits for the context, starts a new chat window, but it's not a clean chat window. It already has some of the context from previously, but you've got to rely on Claude getting the context that it needs to carry forwards correct. It generally doesn't do that. It does a better job than not having any context and starting up a completely blank window, but it's not great. Here, what you could have in a pre-compact hook is you could have things like you actually get to decide, is Claude going to compact, or are you just going to start a new window? You could ask Claude to output the full context of what's already happened, so you've kind of got a history of it up to that point. There's lots of kind of different things you can do here again to make sure that you don't lose the kind of context that you've had right up until then. And for those of you that may have heard of this recently, the Wiggum loop, which is kind of like allowing Claude to have very small sessions where it can complete everything it needs to in one session, and then that feeds back into a larger session and kind of loop over all those sessions. That's a really good way to work, but we don't always have best practice at hand, and sometimes we just have to roll with what we've got. A subagent stop. So obviously we've talked about subagents already, and if your main agent that you're talking to delegates work to a subagent, the subagent goes off, it does its working. and once the subagent's finished, but before it passes it back to the main agent, at that point there is an opportunity for a trigger for a hook again when Claude stops working. So this is essentially once you have sent a message to Claude, Claude's gone away, worked. If it's used a subagent's come back, it's then continued to work, and it's got to the point where it's finished its response to you, and now it's over to you. So at that point, you can have an opportunity again. Once the Claude has stopped, you could then get a prompt to go. You could then trigger a hook. So for example, you might at that point, if you've left a very long working Claude session, you might want to trigger a notification to your mobile phone to say, Claude has finally stopped thinking. Go back to the computer, have a look and see what it says. Next would be on a permission request. So as you've seen throughout this video, Claude will ask permissions, or we can choose to give it permanent permission for that in this session, or we can choose to deny the permission. So if that permission box is about to pop up, we can then have another hook, another trigger, and we can either allow or deny through the hook. And then finally, tool use. So we've got pre and post tool use. So pre-tool use would be, let's say for example that Claude wanted to use bash, it wanted to run a bash script. Before it runs that script, you've got the opportunity to trigger a hook. And then once it has run that bash script as well, you can then again get it to trigger a hook. So perhaps, for example, you want to record every single output of every single bash script. You can do that with a post tool use hook. So let's go on now over into Claude again and have a look at how this works. And now we can simply type /hooks, hit return, and you can see now we've got the hook configuration that's popped up. And it tells you that hooks are shell commands you can register to run during your Claude Code processing. And even a link to here, which takes you off to the Claude Code docs here. And you can see we've got information about the hook events, a quick start guide, which we're going to run through in a moment, and some examples of what we can use hooks for. So first thing we need to do when we're creating a hook is to decide what event we want to use the hook for. And as we've already discussed, you've got pre-tool use, post-tool use, a notification, user prompt submit, session start, stop, subagent start, stop, pre-compact, and session end. So let's say, for example, we wanted to add a hook that logs the shell commands that Claude is running. So for example, we want to run it pre-tool use, so before it executes a shell command. We're going to add a new matcher. And before we add a new matcher, I think it's important to point out here that the tool use explains to you what happens here. So we've got input to the command is a JSON of the tool call argument, and the exit code is 0. That means success. And exit code 2 means not success. It means a stop. It's blocked the tool call. And then other exit codes would show the error to the user, but would continue with the tool call. So basically you'd know what it was, but it would just carry on anyway. So for the matcher, we're going to use bash. So basically we're saying every time it uses the terminal, we want it to notify us. We want it to use the hook. So we're going to hit return on that. And then we're going to add a new hook. I'm going to paste this from Claude's website. So you can see here we're using JQ, and I think it might even be the exact same one as this example here. It is. So yeah, we're literally just using this example here. So if you wanted to have a go at doing this yourself, you could copy this line here, paste it up here, and press return. And again, like everything else we've seen so far through Claude, we've got the project level, which is just for this project uniquely, or at the user level, which is for all the projects that we've run. Again, I'm going to save it at the user level for this example. And then that's already saved the hook. But note, we haven't gone out of the dialog entirely. What we've come back to here is actually the add hook, the pre-tool use matcher, bash. We are saying, so where we've come back to is actually at the point where it says in the pre-tool use, when it matches bash, what do we do? So actually we've got the opportunity here to add as many different hooks as we want on the condition that bash has been found in the pre-tool use response. So in essence, what that means is not only can we just do one command, we can do multiple different hooks at that point. But we don't need to for now, so this is good enough. We will escape, we'll go back one. That takes us now to the pre-tool use. So now if we wanted to add in another different condition, so for example, if the tool was going to be grep instead of bash, then we could add a new condition here, and then we could add in as many hooks for that condition as we wanted to, again, continue down that flow, and escape back again, and it takes us back to the hook configuration page. And finally, we'll escape one last time, and we're back to the actual Claude prompt window again. So now we can see here that it says we've got /hooks, added the pre-tool use hook, and this is what the hook is. And we can also go /hooks, go back into the hooks again and go to pre-tool use, and we can see here that we've got user level, correct, that's what I set, and bash, and there's just one hook. We go in here and we can see what the hook is. That's exactly right. So now we're going to print out the output into .claude/bash command log.txt, which is great. So that has saved successfully. So now we just need to test out whether it works. Just for belt and braces, I'm going to exit. I'm not sure if you actually do need to exit or not, but I'm going to do that, and I'm going to go back in again. Now let's try running a bash script. So now I'm going to say to Claude, using bash, I want you to check the current directory files. And this is forcing it to use bash, so we should see in a second. And there you go. Now we can see that it's used bash here to do ls-la, and obviously all the files have been then listed, which is fine. Let's give it a moment just to finish what it's doing. Now it's telling me the answer to what it's found, which is fine. But what we're really interested in is that file now being populated. So now we're just going to open it up. I'm in cursor already, so I'm just going to use the cursor opener just to have a quick look here. And if you remember, we did it at the user level, so we need to come all the way back to our user file folder here. So we've got .claude, and here is the file bash commands log.txt. Let's click it and let's open it. And you can see here that indeed we do have the command ls-la list all files in current directory. Perfect. So it's told us what's happened. And you can see it's done it in the format that we've set to as well. So for example here, tool input command and the tool input description. Or if there isn't one, just put no description. And that's fine. So it's done exactly what we've asked it to do. But I think this could definitely be improved because we could have timestamps and potentially even conversation logs. So there's a lot more that we could do to improve this logging if we were going to use this logging function. But you can see the concept of hooks and how they work, and obviously you can iterate them to make them as powerful as you want for your use case. And just to labor over the point I made earlier, when we create a hook, we go to /hooks, we then choose the event we want, and for each event we can choose different conditions. In our example, the event was on a tool use, and the condition was if it was bash, and then we only had one hook, which was then to run JQ and to put it into a log for us. But we could have added additional hooks for the same condition of using bash, and indeed for that same event, we could have then had a different condition, which is that if it ran grep or something else, then we could have done something completely different with a different hook, or we could have duplicated the first hook and used it for different events, different conditions as well. And that becomes really, really powerful. It allows us to automate an awful lot of what Claude's doing in the background and doesn't leave it to chance that Claude will do the right thing. And I do think that throughout everything we're using AI for, ironically, the less that you can use AI for, the better. AI should be really only used for the stuff that really is truly non-deterministic and that you need that creativity and individuality. If it's something that you're going to run and it's going to be the same every single time, it doesn't make sense to use AI, it makes sense to use a piece of code. So use the code where you can and only use AI when you can't. Next, I want to just talk about a few extra bits, bonuses if you like, to Claude Code that aren't part of the primary Claude Code. First of all, it's just a bit of a shout out to Rein, who came up with the Sanark repository, which you can find on GitHub. Do search for him. He's a very intelligent guy. He's got his own coding agent, which is slightly different to Claude Code. But what I really liked about Ryan's system is that he was the first person that I found anyway that had created the kind of concept of the PRD and task list into a coding agent and had made it really accessible for lots of people. I don't think he came up with the idea of the PRD and the task list itself, so I'm not crediting him with that, although if you did, Ryan, well done. But he certainly was the first person I know of that created it in a kind of way in which LLMs could go away, create a PRD, create a task list, and then run through that themselves and keep themselves to account, which is really, really powerful. I think we can probably do this with the skill now rather than the way that he originally created it, but this was created before skills were a thing, so I definitely want to give him a shout out. And then YOLO mode. So in Gemini, you might have used Gemini already. You can hold control and press Y when you're in the coding agent. That turns on YOLO mode, which basically means, yes, you have permission to do absolutely everything you want. You make the decisions, you break it, you fix it, you get it right. In Claude Code, you have to add this -- dangerously -skip -permissions onto the end of when you run Claude for the first time. So if we open up a new terminal window, for example here, what we do is we type Claude before we're into Claude itself, and then instead of -- and we can add things like resume or continue, and all those other flags as well. But here we'd go dangerously skip permissions, hit return, and now you've got a lovely warning here, which is we're going to do it in bypass permissions mode, and we're going to choose yes, I accept. Obviously that's on you, and Claude has sort of handed off all responsibility to you. Now do be a little bit careful here. Claude has default access to the folder that you're in and all the way down. It doesn't have access necessarily to the folders above, but obviously it can then take access, because if it runs a bash command, you've already told it it can run any bash command it wants. Therefore, it basically does have access to the entirety of your computer. So you do want to be a little bit careful when you use this. And I would recommend that you only do YOLO mode or dangerously skip permissions on projects which you're just starting up. So I would say it's probably okay if you just want to throw something up, test it, get something going. You really don't care if Claude messes it up. I'd also suggest you could probably use it if you're using GitHub appropriately, you're committing at the right times, and you could use it with a mixture of the right skills, tools, and subagents along the way. Probably wouldn't use it if you're actually doing some work for a customer and they've already got a working product and you just throw YOLO mode at that solution. There is a very high chance that Claude may end up actually breaking something, and it'll take you a lot longer to fix it than if you'd just gone through and carefully worked with Claude. And the final thing I want to talk about as a bit of a bonus is the Ralph Wiggum craze, which has hit the internet in January of 2026. For those of you that aren't familiar with Ralph Wiggum, he is a character from The Simpsons. He's actually Chief Wiggum, the Chief of Police's son, who's like a little bit unintelligent, shall we say, but is super determined to get stuff done. So like the idea is this concept embodies this individual who is like just determined to just keep running at things, keep trying until he basically is successful. The epitome of resilience, right? So the URL is up here, and I'll put it in the notes below as well, but it's basically from Claude Code, and you can actually see here on the GitHub repo we've got Claude Code, and it's their plugin, and it's called Ralph Wiggum, and it does actually explain what it is. It's an implementation of Ralph Wiggum technique for iterative self-referential AI development loops in Claude Code. So what is it? It's basically a bash loop, and what it allows Claude to do is break down a big task into really small tasks and then loop around that task until it's successful, then move on to the next task, loop around that task until successful, and then on to the next one, loop around that task until successful, and then continue going. You can read through all the documents here, but what I would suggest you do is rather take this URL and point Claude to it and ask Claude to understand it and implement it. So let's just have a go at doing that now and see what happens. Let's now just paste the URL and say to Claude, I want to install this plugin, and see what happens. So we're going to allow it to fetch the URL to see what's going on the website. And here we go. So it's actually saying that what we need to do is, first of all, run the bash command /plugin marketplace add anthropics/Claude Code. Now I thought we've already added this, but let's run with it anyway. And we got a 127 error. No such file or directory /plugin, which is weird because I'm pretty sure that is a plugin directory. However, I think what we actually need to do is run this ourselves. So let's go to /plugin, and what we need to do is add the marketplace anthropics/Claude Code. So let's add anthropics/Claude-code and see if it's already added. So it isn't already added, so that's good. And now we can see we've got all the different available options here. So let's scroll down here to Ralph Wiggum. Let's hit enter and hit install now. Now we've installed Ralph Wiggum, let's go to /exit, and then we shall start a new Claude session. And if we go to /plugin now, we should be able to see, actually if we go back there, we can see /plugin, we can see Ralph Wiggum, cancel Ralph, help, and Ralph loop. So if we go to Ralph Wiggum help, let's have a look and see what happens. So let's say, for example, yes, I'd like to set up a Ralph loop for a task in this project. What tasks would you recommend it for, given where our project currently is? And let's see if Claude can actually come up with some suggestions of how we can use a Ralph loop effectively. So here we go. Top 3 recommendations for the loop is 1, make the content form actually work. Best choice, polish the chatbot experience, or accessibility and responsiveness pass. So let's go for making the content form actually work, and let's do that. So I've said let's go for use case 1, and then I've asked it what planning do we need to do before we start the Ralph loop. Take into account the instructions and I've given it the original plugin URL in GitHub/readme, which is, if I flick back, we can see here is this information down here. So if I just go back into having a look, then we can see it's the what is Ralph, core concepts, and the quick start guide. But most importantly, really here, down here, prompt writing best practices, incremental goals, self-correction, escape hatches, and then the philosophy. So I really want Claude to take all that information and then understand it, and then we will use the Ralph loop. So let's see what happens. So we'll click return, let it have a read of that page. So let's just scroll up now and see what happens. So we've got here, define working precisely, We then need to define the success criteria, and we need to set safety limits and have a verification strategy. So I quite like this. Claude's figured out what we need to have in order to be successful, which is exactly right. Otherwise, Claude is going to be unlikely to succeed. Now, we need to decide what the contact form should actually do. Here are your options. Option A, client side, fast demo. Form validates input properly, shows success and error message to user, stores data in browser console just to prove it works. We don't need a back end. It's great for a demo to you guys. Cons, it doesn't actually send it anywhere. Option B, email service integration, hook up to a service like Resend, SendGrid or FormSpree, actually sends emails when form is submitted. Pro is fully functional, cons is requires API keys and account setup. Which approach fits better for this demo? Let's just go with option A for now, just to show this demonstration does work, but I think it wouldn't be that difficult to iterate it slightly up to a SendGrid. All we need to do is add an API key, and in theory, we should be able to get our form to be emailed straight into our own inbox. Obviously, eventually you'd want it to be emailed or sent straight into something like Airtable if you wanted to use a basic database, or Supabase if you wanted a more complex database, or you could do something like straight to a CRM like HubSpot, and using API you could then send all that information straight into HubSpot, capture the data, and then you could trigger other automations to happen as soon as that person's form has been submitted. For example, you could enrich the client data. You could do a lot of other things beyond that. So before we carry on, let's just recap on what we're trying to do here. If you remember from the original part of the video, then we created this for a company called Velocity AI that's delivering cutting-edge artificial intelligence solutions that drive growth, efficiency, and innovation. Sounds pretty good and sounds pretty potent for what we need to achieve. Services, we've just made this up for now, and trusted by industry leaders. And then what have we got here? We've got this form. And at the moment, the form doesn't actually do anything. Let's just show, for example, so John Smith, John, I can't even spell John, John at company.com, company Inc. and hello. Now, if I send the message now, nothing's actually happened. It's just cleared the form. Okay, so it looks like it's functioning, but it's not actually functioning. What we want to do is use Ralph Loop to solve this problem. And I'm going to just say, yeah, let's go with option A. Let's go with option A and your recommendations. So here we go. It realized that Ralph Loop wasn't the command. It then realized we need to do Ralph Wiggum, Ralph Loop. And then we've got the requirements, which is to convert a client component, use client, add proper form validation, show inline error message for invalid fields, disable submit button whilst processing, unsuccessful validation, do this following things, then add a loading state, and then test with both valid and invalid inputs to verify all edge cases work. We'll verify by doing that. When all requirements are met and tested, output form validated. So we've given it the requirements for this to be successful, and we've given it all the different information it needs to succeed. If blocked after 10 iterations, stop and document what's not working. Max iterations 15, so I'm not quite sure they're 10 to 15. I feel like it should be, I suppose what it's saying there is at the 10 point, it'll stop, document what's not working, but it will carry on for a further 5, which is fine. Completion and promise, form validated. Do we want to proceed? Yeah, this looks really good to me. And then obviously this is the actual command itself that it's going to pass. So let's go for it. Now we've had an error here. I'm not sure why. So it looks like Claude can't itself do this at the moment. So instead I'm going to say to it, okay, instead give me the prompt and I'll run it directly. Sometimes you've got to work around Claude little quirks and things. That's okay. There's nothing too stressful here. Here's the exact thing. So let's just try this now. So slash Ralph Wiggum, Ralph Loop. And there you go. Now we've got prompt, max iterations, and completion promise. So that's exactly right. So let's just take this now. And we're going to put a quote at the beginning of it because I do think that's important to make sure that we capture it correctly. So let's paste all that in there. And I'm just going to hit enter and see what happens. Interesting. Okay, so that failed. Bash command permission check failed for pattern. Okay, so I've actually just skipped out of Claude. I've come back into it with the extra flag of dangerously skip permissions, and then I've rerun the Ralph loop, and you can see now it's actually working. It's allowed one tool for the command, and it's saying it'll make the contact form fully functional. And let me start by reading the current form implementation and then implementing all the requirements. So currently it's reading app/page.tsx. And we're going to just let it run and see how successfully the Ralph loop works. What I'll do is I'll just actually bring this up to the very top so we've got as much of the screen as possible so we can read through. So it's making all these changes to the app/page.tsx. And I think the Ralph loop may need to allow full permissions. So I would say bear that in mind. It is something that you need to be a little bit careful of. And if you're not happy with giving full permissions at this point, then perhaps don't use the rel loop. So it looks like it was a fairly simple change that it made, but fairly simple is good, right? We want to always break things down as small as possible, as few loops as we actually need, prove that it works, and then move on to the next thing. So we could actually expand this out in future. So here it's trying to start the page for us. Now it was already up anyway, but it's gone to 3001 because I think it started a fresh server. So let's go and have a look now and see what that looks like. So we'll bring this page down again, and we'll go back to the actual up page here. And if we refresh, that actually looks like it's not working. So let's go to 3001. There we go. So we're on 3001 now, which is the correct port that it's just brought the form up on. And we can see that we've got this form here. So let's just do that now. John Smith, john@company.com, company Inc. Hello. Okay, so here we go. Hello. Good day. Right. Now let's send the message and let's see what happens. What we should get now is the form's been sent successfully, which is good. It was grayed out, which is also good. It has been printed. So there you go. So all we need to do instead of printing it to the console is send this information either via a webhook or via an API, and then we'd capture all that information. We could send it via SendGrid if we wanted to actually send ourselves an email, but I'd probably suggest a webhook or even an API call would be the better option here. But you can see we've captured that data and we can do whatever we want with that data in the future. So it's clearly working. We could then use the Ralph loop to continue to do more complicated developments. But again, doesn't matter how complicated the development is, what you need to do is break it down into the smallest and simplest composite block, take a big task, break it down into the smallest parts, get to the tiny part, run a Ralph loop on it, and then continue. This is definitely the way that we're going to be moving, I think, with context coding and vibe coding. And I would say get involved in this. This has taken a lot of excitement recently, but it is going to change over time. I think we're going to see this become implemented more into actually how Claude works naturally, and we won't need to prompt it quite as heavily. Now we're on to the real finishing touches of being able to use Claude Code, and that is being able to use it when you're out and about. So my local setup is that I have a computer back at home which is running Claude Code. I've got the max plan, so I've got quite a lot of allowance, and I often want to run it, and I don't want to sit around waiting for Claude to finish. But I also know that sometimes I am the blocker in the development process, because I want Claude to revert back to me, tell me at certain points what it's done, where it's up to. I want to be able to review it and check that everything's good. But I don't necessarily want to sit around and wait for that to happen. I want to get on with my life. I want to do other projects. I want to go and meet with clients. I want to spend time with my family, whatever it is. But I also don't want to block that pipeline. And for me, a really good solution to this has been able to run Claude remotely, or be able to access my local Claude remotely. So I'm not running it remotely in terms of I don't have an instance on my iPhone that's running. I'm also not using Anthropic's cloud version. I know that Anthropic have been improving their ability to sort of code from your phone by using Claude app on your iPhone. This method is slightly different and it's well documented. There are quite a lot of people that are talking about how to do it online. So if this method doesn't work for you, then by all means go and check out some of the other methods that are out there. However, this one has worked really well for me, and it has allowed me to continue development without having to put my life on hold. So in essence, the concept is fairly simple. What we've got here is my computer at home, and maybe I've got a laptop and other devices, and this is kind of, this circle here is my home network, if you like. What I've done is I've run something called TailScale, and this is TailScale here. It's essentially a VPN, a virtual private network. Many people have heard of VPNs, but a lot of people use them to kind of circumvent geographical barriers, or in the UK, a lot of people are using them to circumvent having to prove that they're 18 years old or over. And that's fine. That's definitely one use of VPNs, but this is kind of more of the traditional sense of a VPN, and probably more familiar for those of you that work for a corporate organization. And what you'll often have to do is you have to connect to Citrix or something similar on your computer. Otherwise, it won't allow you to access your office's like file system and be able to use all of the apps like Microsoft Suite. That is what TailScale is more for, but on a smaller level it's free, and the setup here is entirely free. You can improve it by paying some subscriptions, but the setup I've got here is entirely free. And what TailScale allows you to do is it allows you to connect any device outside of your home network, and it makes it seem like your remote devices are actually inside this bubble. So it pushes the phone inside. Now, in terms of your IP address to the internet, in terms of all these other things that you might have used a VPN for, TailScale doesn't do that. So if you use your phone here and you want to go onto a website, then the website still thinks it's this phone in wherever this location of the phone is right now. So that doesn't change. And same for this computer. This computer, unless it's got a different VPN turned on, then this computer's IP will still be to the remote internet. It will still be the same IP and it will still be the same location of wherever you are. So it doesn't solve any of those problems. But what it does allow is this phone to see this computer and this computer to see this phone. So that's TailScale. Then the next app is called Zellij. Now Zellij is a way that you can get the terminal, and I'll just flick over and show you because it's probably easier to show you than to talk it through. So at the moment you can see here we've got one terminal, and if we click into Claude, then you can see Claude is running here at the moment and we can kill Claude and whatever else, but that's it. What I want to do instead is if I run Zellij, and I'll just go Zellij like this, you can now see we've kind of got a little funky green thing here. I can press escape, and along the bottom here what you can now see is we've got extra commands. If we just go to Control G now, you can see now we've locked this, and basically if we do Control and anything other than G, it won't impact on this terminal. But what it also allows us to do, if we undo Control G, we can choose to, for example, add a new tab. If we go Control and T, you'll see we get new options down here, and indeed we can add in a new tab. So if we choose N now, you can see at the top here we've now got tab 1 and tab 2, and we can actually scroll through by going Control T and swapping the focus with our arrow keys between tab 1 up here now, and then if we go across to tab 2. Or indeed we can actually use our mouse and we can click when we're locally in our Mac. Now we can press escape and we're back to the main terminal, and we can type as normal. And I'm going to Control G again. But what that allows us to do is potentially have multiple different Claude instances running along the top here, which we can swap across to. Or for example, we can have just a normal terminal window here, and then we could have Claude running here, and we could have, for example, our database. We could have database queries in another tab, and it gives us a lot of flexibility. And this becomes even more powerful when we're on our phone remotely out and about. So when we're in Zellij now, we can run Claude. Now what we've got here is a Claude session running inside Zellij, and you can see this green kind of like box around the edge shows us that we're in Zellij, and at the top here, Zellij Quiet Lake. So Quiet Lake is this Zellij specifically running. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to Control G to unlock it. And then instead of quitting, I don't want to quit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to choose the option of the session, and I'm going to choose Control O. Now there's new options, and the D for detach is the one we're going to do. So D, and you can see now we are back into our normal terminal window. But we could come along and just open up a new terminal window next day, day after, whatever it is, as long as we haven't closed the computer down, and we could remotely log in from a different computer or our iPhone remotely. And now we can choose Zellij, attach, Quiet Lake. And this is telling us we want to reattach back to that Quiet Lake session that we had running a moment ago. Now we've got Zellij, attach, and then Quiet Lake, and that will allow us to attach back to the session we opened a moment ago with its special name. So if we hit enter, you can see now we're straight back in. We've got the same tabs that are already open, and importantly, our Claude session is still here for us to come back to later, which is really, really helpful. I'm going to keep the screen up and running here, so you're going to be able to see real time what I'm doing on my phone, and then you'll be able to see that it's actually like syncing live as well. So you can literally pick up midway through. If your phone drops, then everything saves. So you may be able to see that now, but that is what is on my phone screen right now. So you can see on my browser I'm using Termius, and I'm going to type Zellij attach Quiet Lake, hit enter, and now you can see on the screen here in front of us that Claude Code has massively reduced the size of the box. That's because it's matching the smallest box, which is my phone. And again, you can see it's now logged into Claude Code. So if I start typing now and say, hi, I'm doing a YouTube demo on Zellij, run a basic bash command, hit return, and you can see that's going on the screen right now live, and the two are syncing together. But I'm doing this from my phone. And yes, I am obviously in the same home network right now, but I'm doing it over TailScale. So the phone could be in a different country. It literally doesn't matter as long as your phone's got access to the internet. So now we understand how Zellij and SSH and TailScale work together. What we can do now is actually set it up for ourselves. And the setup process is fairly simple. I'm going to assume you've installed Homebrew already. If you haven't, it's Very simple to do. Just ask Claude to give you a hand if you're not sure, or just Google homebrew install Mac. Once you've installed it, then we want to run brew, install TailScale, Zellij, and Mosh. That allows us to have obviously those 3 packages. And we want to then set up TailScale and then check that TailScale is working. Once TailScale is working, we then need to allow remote login onto our Mac. So it's system settings, general sharing, remote login, and then enable. And it should be simple. If there's any dramas, again, quick Google or even ask Claude what's going on. Have a look for me, tell me what's not working. Side note here, I would only enable it for your own user account, not all users, but that's up to you. You know what's best for your setup. We then need to set up an SSH directory if you don't have one already. So we want to run the following commands, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I just copied these lines one at a time. So make directory and .ssh if it doesn't exist. You then want to set the permissions correctly for it. And then you want to create an authorized key file, and then you want to set the correct permissions for that. And then when you ls/la, you should be able to then see that you've got this drwx for .ssh for the directory, and then read write only for authorized keys. And that's correct. We then want to run Zellij locally, and you just type the word Zellij into the terminal just to check it runs, and then you can choose exit, quit out of it, and that's fine. Once you've got Zellij running, you then want to set up Termius. So onto your iPhone now, we want to go into the settings of Termius, keychain, generate a key. We then want to copy that key, and then if you're running on the same user account, you should just be able to type in your terminal, echo, double quote, paste, and then literally paste from what's copied from your iPhone straight onto the Mac, and then space, and then type Termius iPhone or whatever you want to let you know that that's what that key is for. Double quotes, space, 2 close square brackets, space, and then tilde / .ssh / authorized _ keys. And then that will allow you to save this new key that you've got from Termius into the authorized file here. Then back onto Termius on your phone, you need to set up your connection to your computer. So you want to find the TailScale IP. You can do that on a Mac by going up to the top of your Mac on the menu bar and clicking on the TailScale icon and finding it there, or installing TailScale onto your iPhone, which you need to do, and make sure that you then select the TailScale IP of computer working from home. Add the username and password and select Mosh. That should then allow you to use Mosh via SSH and run Zellij. Once you've got a new terminal window open, it should look very similar to the terminal session that you're running when you run terminal in your computer at home. And then we just want to type the word Zellij again from the phone. This should then enable us to set up a Zellij session remotely from the phone. And at that point, we then want to run Claude, and we type Claude, and then we have got the parity session running, which is then connected both to the desktop and to our mobile phone. And that is it, you're away. So that completes this tutorial on how to go from zero knowledge of understanding Claude Code through to being able to code on the move with mobile phone and using terminal. It is quite complicated. I hope you've been able to stick with this entire process, and I hope you haven't tried to binge it through in 3.5 hours, but if you have, then massive congrats for doing so. Thank you for sticking with this video, and I really appreciate it. If you appreciate this video and you'd like more of this sort of content, then drop a like below. And if you're interested in further ways in which you can make money by using AI, then come and join the AI Freedom Finders community. The link is in the description below. See you in the next video.